All right, good evening, everyone. I would like to call the Committee of the Whole public meeting for April 8th, 2025 to order. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin homelands. I would like to acknowledge and thank the Algonquin nations for the stewardship of these lands. I would now like to ask if anyone has an interest to declare to please do so now. Seeing none, I would now like to call for a mover to approve the agenda. Trustee Kaplan-Murth. Does anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that carries. Moving on to the briefing from the Chair of the Board. Chair Scott, can you please provide your briefing?
Good evening. As part of Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month in April, we are welcoming Dr. Grant Bruno on the 10th of April for a virtual session, Decolonizing Autism, a Nehiya Plains Cree perspective, which will explore how to better support Indigenous families with autistic children by incorporating Indigenous perspectives and knowledge. Visit our website for more details on that. And we are also inviting comments and questions regarding the 2025-2026 budget and budget process. You can share your thoughts using the online form available at engage.ocdsb.ca. Your comments will be shared with senior staff and will be used to update our frequently asked questions section. The deadline for input on that is the 10th of June, 2025. And that ends my briefing.
All right, thank you, Chair Scott. Are there any questions for the chair? Seeing none, I will move on to the briefing from the Director. Director, can you please provide your briefing?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, good evening, everyone. The OCDSB witnessed a truly historic and remarkable moment when educator Jeannie Hunter, head of special education and fine arts at Nepean High School, claimed the coveted 2025 Music Counts Teacher of the Year Award at the Juno Awards recently. We join the nation in celebrating Jeannie, a teacher whose 3-decade-long dedication to music education has created a lasting harmony within her school and her community. Jeannie's Teacher of the Year Award is a well-deserved standing ovation. Congratulations, Jeannie. Next, registration for the 2025 summer school programs is now open. Continuing education offers a variety of in-person and virtual programs. Summer school secondary credit programs are offered for students currently in grades 8 to 12 and adult learners working towards their high school diploma. Remedial programs are offered for students in grades 6 to 8. For more information, please visit our website at ocdsb.ca. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to extend our best wishes to all of those in our community celebrating the Festival of Passover this weekend and Vasaki on Monday. That ends my briefing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director. Does anyone have any questions for the Director? I am seeing none, and we have no delegations this evening, so I will now call for a mover to receive the unofficial report of the Special Education Advisory Committee dated January 8th, 2025. Trustee Dixon, are there any errors or omissions to this report? Seeing none, I will now call the vote to receive the report. All those in favor? And that carries. I will now call for a mover to receive the report of the Special Education Advisory Committee dated February 5th, 2025. Trustee Kaplan-Murth, are there any errors or omissions? Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you, through you, Chair. It's not so much that there's an error or omission, but it was pointed out at SEAC when these minutes were approved at SEAC that they don't reflect the conversation that occurs. And the members of SEAC are concerned that when we don't capture the conversation, we lose important conversation, critique, analysis that occurs. So there was a question raised about these minutes in general. So I'm just putting that on the record.
All right, thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. I can look to Governance Services and they can revisit the minutes should we need to and revise as needed. So I'm now going to call the vote to receive the minutes. All those in favor? And that carries. I will now call for a mover to receive the report of the Audit Committee dated February 19th, 2025. Trustee Blackburn, are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I will now call the vote to receive the report. All those in favor? And that carries. Moving on to item 9, matter for action, I will now call upon Trustee Dixon to present the notice of motion on anti-racism and anti-hate. Trustee Dixon, would you like introduction?
Yes, Chair. I'd like to, I brought this motion over because with the human rights, their news proposal that came out about anti-racism that's happening in our schools across the district. And I think with the new elementary program that we are also having in place, I think this is the best time for the director to implement it and put it through so it covers all aspects of education when it comes to our marginalized students and Indigenous students.
All right, thank you, Trustee Dixon. Before I start my speakers list, I will look to the director to provide any comment from staff.
Through you, Madam Chair, really appreciate the spirit of what Trustee Dixon is bringing forward here. It has not only more broadly, but in the context of the district's Indigenous equity and human rights roadmap, our full support for the work that's the spirit of the work that's in the motion brought forward.
All right, thank you, Director. I am looking around the room to see if there are any questions or speakers to this motion. Trustee Lyra?
Thanks. So I am broadly in support of this. My only question is the timeline realistic? Is it something that staff feel they can achieve with everything else going on?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think Trustee Lyra raised a good point. You know, when we look at a motion of this nature, we would look to integrate, and I think we have been integrating aspects of this in the past. So we would bring it forward in multiple capacities through the roadmap that would be brought forward on a regular basis anyway. So we don't feel as staff that this would have a sort of a start date time. I think it's work that we've been doing, looking to support. So we would just integrate what we're doing to see elements of this particular motion through in any roadmap update we would bring.
Great, thank you. This has my full support. No questions.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. I have Trustee Scott, then Trustee Kaplan-Murphy, then Trustee Presley. Trustee Scott?
Thank you. I'm very pleased to see this recommendation coming forward. We do not seem to be getting regular reports and updates on the roadmap. And we certainly have not been getting regular updates and reports on the implementation of a wide variety of interventions that are happening in schools in terms of making a difference for students when it comes to their rights, their identities. And I think that's really important. So my question through you to staff is whether this would become a regular event as opposed to a one-off. That is my concern, that we don't want this to be just a one-off in response to the motion.
Through you, Madam Chair, I appreciate Chair Scott's commentary, and it's unfortunate that we're just a few weeks out from the next update on the roadmap itself, which I think would have been well timed. We'll look to make sure it becomes a part of the roadmap's regular, really report to the Board of Trustees, and that's coming very, very shortly in the month of May forward. I believe it's May. I'll double check with staff in case I've mistaken if it's June, but I do think it's scheduled to come forward in May. So we'll look in the renewed roadmap to address the spirit of this anti-racism, anti-hate work that we're doing as a district. So comment noted by staff, and we'll make sure it's part of that report.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. Trustee Kaplan-Murphy?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I would also support this motion for sure. I guess my question to staff is whether there is any possibility that you could include, rather than waiting until September, if you could include a report on how the district is implementing equity and inclusive education policies in our elementary program review.
Through you, Madam Chair, a couple of points there. One, with respect to the Indigenous education aspects of the roadmap, and I'll just address these in slightly sort of interrelated but distinct parts. On the Indigenous education front, we are working with an Indigenous scholar, Laurie Robinson of Wolf Lake, who is beginning the work of promising practices, environmental scans, listening and learning from our educators on what practices there are Indigenous in nature that can be interwoven not only into the program review at the elementary level, but all of our programs and services from start to success, including secondary. So that work is well underway, and we'll look to make sure that when that report comes forward at the end of this school year or early into the next school year, I'm not entirely sure the exact timeline of Laurie's work, and what's more important than the timeline is the quality of the work. I understand that, but we'll bring that forward. From a human rights perspective, with respect to the roadmap, of course, our Human Rights Equity Advisor is currently off. As soon as there is a return there, we'll look to also bring forward a report on that important work. We've been doing some of that work, continuing it through third-party channels during Carolyn's absence, so we'll look to bring it forward. And of course, through Mary Jane, Superintendent Farish, we'll look to the work of the equity team. And again, that will most definitely come forward in the roadmap report that's coming in the next number of weeks.
Just to clarify, that wasn't my question. My question was whether or not you could provide us with some sort of statement to demonstrate how the elementary program review is implementing equity and inclusive education policies, and not specifically just for Indigenous students, but for racialized students and low socioeconomic status students.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, my apologies to Trustee Kaplan-Murph. Duly noted by staff, we'll make sure that the report that comes forward, likely not the next one on implementation pieces, but the report that comes forward on recommendations in May will have a component that addresses this particular item. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murph. I have Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'm fully supportive of this motion. Thank you to Trustee Dixon for bringing this forward. I'm also quite appreciative of Trustee Kaplan-Murph's comments regarding providing additional data to us about inclusion and accessibility in regards to the EPR. I'm wondering, I'm just going to say this for food for thought for some of the trustees, and maybe this is something we want to implement as part of the motion. But I would love to see some accountability on the part of the board on our work towards implementing the TRC's call to action in relation to education. So if that's the appetite of the board, I'd love to see some sort of inclusion on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Presley. I can see the director nodding along, so he is taking notes on that. We're now going to move on to Menashe, please.
Hi there, thank you. If it's okay with you, I'd like for Lily Miller to be able to speak first, just so that I don't duplicate anything she's saying.
Sure. Lily, would you please go ahead?
Sure. I thought I would have an extra couple of minutes to gather my thoughts. My first question is, when was the board's anti-racism, anti-hate policy last updated? Can you hear me?
Just one moment, Lily. We're just trying to confirm the answer. Lily, do you mind asking your next question, and we're just going to confirm our answer, just to make sure we're correct?
Sure. And then I have, I really was hoping to get this report that the motion is based on sooner rather than later, because the program review, the elementary program review is like part of this, the legislation talks about consultation with marginalized groups and with community. And the program review is really like coming along pretty quickly. And it would be, I'm afraid that it's going to be after the fact, after consultations. And Yeah, that's my concern there. If this is coming in September, is there still time to do some work on what's missing?
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Lily, for your comments. A few points. One, in the consultation processes, both the active community engagement campaign for input last spring and the active community engagement campaign for feedback, both this fall and this winter, heading now into the spring, has involved a number of not only board committees, of course, but a number of marginalized groups. There were specific sessions in schools that are tied to our SATE inquiry, for instance. A number of our more marginalized or schools with greatest socioeconomic challenges. Staff set up specific sessions beyond the ones that happened, of course, here in the school board context at the board office with those communities. So there has been reach out to marginalized groups. Of course, we're working through IAC for additional input on through Laurie Robinson's work from an Indigenous perspective that will, again, not only feed the program review itself, but all of our work in programs and services across the district. So staff continuing to reach out to those communities in the revised proposal and looking, of course, to the work of Laurie that she's working with various members of our Indigenous community as well. So very much so looking for ongoing input. And we've had very, very honest, genuine feedback from some of our marginalized communities that have shaped the revised report in front of you this evening. And I will turn it over to Executive Officer Mark just for an update on the first question, Lily.
So through you, Chair, there are two policies, I guess, that could answer this question. One is the human rights policy, and the other is the equity and inclusive education policy. They both kind of address issues of equity, obviously. The equity and inclusive education policy was last revised in 2011, but is currently under review. So there should be some revisions to that proposed soon, I believe. And the human rights policy was approved and passed in 2022.
Lily, would you like to add anything else?
Thank you. Just hoping when the policy is up for review that the a member of IAC can be on that policy review committee. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Lily. We will go back to Menashe, and then I have Trustee Kaplan-Meier.
Thank you very much. Just from the ACE committee, we're new this time around, and so I can't bring much forward. But what was discussed in the last ACE committee meeting around this issue is that when there are community consultations, often things like data collection and surveys, there's a barrier, a cultural barrier for some in that adding information, personal information, or even anonymous information seems it's scary for a lot of people, depending on what kind of background they come from. And so I'm hoping that when we do community consultation, we can be clever and innovative in how we collect quote unquote data, so that those who maybe weren't willing to give their input out of this fear will be willing to. And then in addition, just keeping in mind that, I think there are a lot of people who are surprised by the program review, which is surprising to me, if all this effort is being put into community consultation. And I think perhaps the reason why so many people are shocked and surprised is maybe because from a socioeconomic point, if letters are being sent home or emails being sent home, and if somebody's working 2-3 jobs, they might not have the time to go to meetings or even—
Sorry, point of order, Madam Chair. I think we're supposed to be debating the motion on the floor. And I'm concerned that the last few questions are really going outside the scope of what we're supposed to be discussing here. We're supposed to be debating the motion on the floor. And I just want to flag that as a concern that you may want to pay attention to here.
All right, thank you, Executive Officer. I appreciate the reminder. We will let the thought be finished, and then we can move along with the continuing discussion, because we do have more people on the speakers list. So you can finish your thought.
Thank you for clarification. If I want to refocus it on the anti-racism policy review, even the data that we use when we talk about anti-racism and the pathway, that's used when we do community consultation. And so that data would be skewed if we're not reaching out to people in the ways that they are likely to engage. And so I'm going to ask if we can be mindful of that in the ways that we do ask for these kind of data that we're relying on as proof for the effectiveness of our pathways. Thank you. That's all.
All right, thank you for sharing. The director is nodding his head and it's been duly noted. We're going to continue down our speakers list. So Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Two things. One is just a very simple semantic thing, but in the actual motion, it says an increase in racial and hateful behavior, but I think it's racist, not racial, because there's no racial behavior, racist behavior. So it doesn't really matter because that's a whereas, not the actual therefore be it resolved. But I think that is maybe a typo. Yeah, it should be an increase in racism, right? So that just needs to be duly noted. The other thing is that speaking on behalf of Israelis and Jewish students and staff in the OCDSB, it is an act of aggression for the ACE member to have just been wearing a keffiyeh. And that may not be something that anybody else recognizes, but as an Israeli, I can tell you that that is an act of aggression and it is inappropriate.
Great, thank you. That has been duly noted, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. All right, are there any other speakers to the item? I am seeing none, so Trustee Bell, please go ahead.
Just quickly, wanted to thank the mover for bringing this forward. I think the more reminders that we get, the more reports and initiatives that get us thinking about how to ensure that we have a safe and welcoming community within our school, the better. And I think this goes a long way. So thanks to Trustee Dixon for bringing this forward.
All right, thank you, Trustee Bell. Trustee Dixon, would you like wrap up?
None needed. None required, sorry.
Thank you, Trustee Dixon. All right, so I am now going to call the vote for all those in favor. And that carries unanimously with one absence. So congratulations, Trustee Dixon. And we're now going to be moving on. So we're going to move on to matters for discussion, and I'm going to call upon the director to present the report on the elementary program review revised proposal.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Looking to bring forward to the Board of Trustees a revised proposal related to the program model and support for students, attendance boundaries, and grade configurations. I'll take a few moments just to take the Board of Trustees through some context, a few comments related to the report itself. I do have General Manager Ostafchuk here for questions and any additional points that she would like to add. My deep gratitude to General Manager Ostafchuk and the Planning Department for their incredible work on the program review at the elementary level, and quite frankly, their stamina over the past number of months through this work. The revised proposal, as you'll note on folio 18, is really a synopsis of the program review to date, including proposed changes outlined in previous reports, highlighting any additional changes that we've made or adjustments in response to the extensive feedback received through the active community engagement campaign itself. You'll note in the strategic links, and I return to this through all of the reports, that the genesis of the program review at the elementary level really was the fine work done on the renewed strategic planning process before my return to the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board in August of 2023. You'll find a link to the report. There are themes within that report on the strategic plan consultation, one of which spoke to program quality and accessibility. A reminder to the Board of Trustees as well that the current review at the elementary level is the first stage in 4 parts of a multi-year vision exercise being undertaken by the district to ensure inclusive, high quality and accessible programs and services offered. Folio 19 You'll note that there's 6 programs really in and around the elementary level for the district, taking aside the bilingual kindergarten program for which there are no changes being proposed, as well as an Ottawa-Carleton virtual offering, which will continue to be offered in the context of whatever program offerings are revised by the district through this process. We really are looking at 4 programs: English, Early French Immersion, Middle French Immersion, and Alternative. The existing structure for serving multilingual learners, as you'll note within the report, looks at classroom support for English as a second language or English as an additional language learners within the context of the standard classroom, as well as early literacy development classes. Those are specialized program classes for students whose schooling has been interrupted or who have significant literacy-based needs to be addressed, as well as the intentional reintegration strategies that come with bringing those students back into the standard classroom over time. That's always the goal for our multilingual learners. The existing model for delivery of special education was last reviewed approximately 20 years ago. We have, as a district, addressing some students, particularly those with the most complex learning needs, a series of specialized program classes typically located in a school outside of the student's community. Currently, there are 11 distinct exceptionality-based SPCs, specialized program classes, at the elementary level, totaling 142 classes. All of this represents for the district over the past quarter century a patchwork of school configurations, which include a number of grade structures, over 8, a range of programs from single track to triple track, as well as a number of schools across the district hosting one or more of the ESL/ELD classes or the SPCs. The elementary program review to date, you'll find on folio 20, there have been 4 previous reports. They are all linked there for the Board of Trustees and the public. You'll note in the overarching principles that they remain intact for the district in this revised proposal. Community-based education, lots, I'm sure, that you are well aware has been received in the feedback on that, and some of the revised proposal we hope addresses that. Dynamic bilingual teaching and learning environments, as well as a continuum of inclusion. We have, through the elementary program model on folio 21 and the transitional provisions, are recommending, with respect to programming at the elementary level, the phase out of Middle French Immersion and alternative programs, leaving 2 programs for the district, one in English and one in French that I'll speak to shortly. Middle French Immersion, the last cohort for MFI, students would enter grade 4 as of September 2026 and complete grade 8 by the end of the 2030-2031 school year. That ensures any student currently who had planned, his parents, guardians, caregivers had planned for a Middle French Immersion would be captured in that phase out. For the alternative program, students currently enrolled and attending a site designated as ALT as of April 2025, and any kindergarten students registering for September 2025 would continue to have access to the program until they complete it at the end of grade 6 or, as applicable, grade 8. That would take students through, finishing at the end of the 2034-2035 school year. The district is committed to the integration of the tenets of the alternative program, including cooperation and teamwork, multi-age groupings, cross-curricular initiatives, and others, into both the enhanced English and French immersion programs being recommended. Over the phasing out of the program, staff will work collaboratively with the Alternative Schools Advisory Committee to capture ways to embed best practices from the tenants across the system. You'll note in the area of support for students, especially with respect to special needs, that we are moving in an evolving way as a learning-oriented organization to shifting services to students, not students to services, ensuring early intervention and monitoring to inform programming, and to keep options open for students to the greatest extent possible. The focus on the continuum of inclusion prioritizes in-class support with targeted withdrawal as needed, and of course, the maintenance of a number of specialized program classes. It also creates teaching and learning environments that support student well-being and adjust to students' unique needs. Of the 11 program offerings, the phasing out of LLD, the Language Learning Disabilities class, LDSIP, the Learning Disabilities Specialized Intervention Program, and primary gifted classes proceed as originally planned in the revised proposal. However, the primary special needs, PSN, and junior.
Point of
general-
order. Point of order, please, Chair. I'm
Uh,
sorry, I didn't think this would be going on so long. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No
Director.
problem. Are you unable to hear the meeting?
I'm able to hear the meeting, but I'm just very upset and want to call for an apology and withdrawal of the comment of Trustee Kaplan-Murth's request, in that it's an attack on a vulnerable community.
No, I'm sorry.
It's a
Junior
public attack.
All right,
on-
sorry,
it-
all right. I'm
so-
asking for
I'm sorry.
decorum to be kept in the room. I'm asking for decorum to be kept in the room.
And as
Lil-
a member of a community that's experienced genocide.
Lily,
Sorry.
Lily, I
Point of order.
appreciate that you are, the point of order that you are trying to call right now. We are in the middle of the introduction of a different topic, so we can't take the point of order at that time. We're gonna call a 2-minute recess. We're gonna let everyone decompress, so 2 minutes, and we are gonna be back in public. Jesse? All right, apologies. We needed just a few moments. So just to clarify, a point of order has to be raised during the point that was up for discussion. We are in the middle of the introduction of a new point, so we're going to restart the introduction and we're going to continue on with our meeting. So Director, please pick up where you left off. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, just to bring the trustees back on page 6, folio 23. The PSN primary special needs and the junior general learning program will be retained in the revised proposal, while further support and enhanced integration options are explored for these students. This is really as reducing the 11 distinct special program classes from 11 to 8 and not 6. I wanted to make that point. You'll see a summary of that on page 7 in the chart. So on both page 4 and page 7, you'll have a summary chart for the program recommendations and the support for student recommendations respectively. On item 9, page 7 or folio 24, we feel as a staff we've brought forward a sensible and sound, reasonable and responsive revised plan for the Board of Trustees. I want to make it clear that the plan is not perfect in any capacity. It really is a combination of a multifaceted view of all of the feedback received on folios page 8, pardon me, folio 25, there's a number of elements of feedback that were received, and the initial proposal has been revised in response to that feedback. In some cases, this has meant undoing the proposed changes and leaving school boundaries, program offerings, and grade configurations intact. In other cases, it means making adjustments to the proposed boundaries, for example, to preserve traditional community ties within neighborhoods that we heard so much about as staff. You will see on folio 33, Appendix A, a revised chart showing the proposed program offerings and grade configurations by school. There's a number of transitional provisions that we're looking to address as staff and ensure that we maintain, first and foremost, adhering to the ministry's pupil accommodation review guidelines. The revised proposal alleviates, in many cases, some of the transitional anomalies originally identified. Although there are still many cases, or some cases, where attendance boundaries and grade configurations will be somewhat complicated, at least in the short term, and we as staff wanted to acknowledge that. We're also looking at to put into place in item 11 a process to consider grandparenting provisions and exceptions, as there have been numerous inquiries and concerns about whether grandparenting provisions have been or will be considered in the transition, and we're assuring both our public and the Board of Trustees that we will do so. Given the complexity and scope of the changes being proposed, there is, a reluctance to identify a broad-scale grandparenting exception that would apply to every single individual. A blanket exception or exemption or exceptions are also based on an assumption that everyone feels the same, and we know that's not the case. As such, we'll work through a process through Associate Director Reynolds to have a mechanism in place. We'll begin that work this spring once a recommendation is approved in whatever capacity that is. Additional operational considerations you'll note in item number 12 on folio 27 or page 10 of the report that look at a number of aspects. Childcare. And with the revised proposal, we know that there'll be many fewer childcare concerns, a number of those items addressed. Student and staff movement, with student movement down from an additional 3,000 students to a little under 1,500 for the upcoming, not the upcoming school year, the year of the decision, the 2026-2027 school year. Working with our Federation Union partners with respect to staff movement, and of course, the Ottawa Student Transportation Authority on any transportation-related or busing-related changes as a result of recommendations from the program review. Last but not least, we understand that some of the revised elements of the proposal, in particular the K-3, 4 to 8 schools that were causing concern around multi-child families being split very young, have been addressed in a large number of cases. There are still some K-3, 4 to 8 schools, but predominantly in areas where they were already in place, which might in some ways otherwise soften the enrollment of programs by consolidating cohorts over fewer grades that won't quite be achieved. The shift away from these configurations, albeit for valid reasons and in response to the impact, to the feedback, may increase the risk of small and potentially unsustainable programs moving forward. Staff is aware of that, acknowledges it, and will look to address any challenges in that way as time proceeds once a decision's been made. Of importance to note are revised timelines, including a report next week around implementation considerations, an additional delegation night for individuals who may be impacted by the revised proposal on the 22nd of April, and looking for a decision both in terms of discussion on May 6th and ultimately tentatively a board meeting on the 13th of May. For a number of reasons, it's important that a decision not be further significantly delayed in order for the staff to prepare fully during the upcoming school year, and for parents, guardians, and caregivers to have a reassurance and stability of whatever the outcome may be. Important that we highlight that, and that's the reason for our timelines. We do have in the resource implications a project transition team notion that we will put into play to begin that work as soon as a recommendation is made, including, you'll note in the summary, a contingency fund that we'll bring forward as part of the additional budgetary considerations this school year for the upcoming school year, not the years of implementation of the elementary program review, but for that year where we're doing a lot of the transitional work of $375,000. that will allow us to support a full-time project lead that continues. We did that this school year, leading up to the fall of 2026, as well as funds for the release of working groups, our talented staff who will help us through this transitional process. Last but certainly not least, and I appreciate the trustees allowing me this time to provide an opening Appendix B on Folio 41. You'll see the link on page 14 of the report. Takes you to the consultation feedback. My gratitude to our strategic business analyst, Kenna Merchik, who provided a summary for the Board of Trustees on the feedback received, which was extensive, over 10,000 individual pieces of information, and we're grateful to the public for their engagement in this process. We're providing a 3-week window through our Engage platform from the 3rd to the 24th of April to provide an additional opportunity for feedback prior to recommendations being brought forward to the Board of Trustees, as well as reaching out, of course, to our Ministry of Education representatives with respect to our programs and services offered in the proposal therein. So through you, Madam Chair, thank you again for the time for the introduction.
All right, thank you, Director. And just to confirm, there's no other staff that want to speak before we go to our speakers list? Okay, so we do have a speakers list started. I want to say to everyone, thank you again for bringing this report forward. I know how much work has gone into the back end as we continue to talk about the elementary program review. Before I dive into the speakers list, I would like to ask trustees to try to keep your first round of questions more district-wide, and then your second round can be more focused on individual schools or your individual zones. I also do want to note for the room that we are welcoming any community partner to raise their hand, and we look forward to hearing from you as well. But if trustees raise their hand, they will be prioritized on the speaking list, and then we will move on to you. So please do not worry. We are going to be listening. So with that said, let's dive into the speakers list. We have Trustee Jenkins and Trustee Kaplan-Meier. Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director, for your introduction. And actually, I'd also like to thank General Manager Osterchuk for her always being available and when I call and answering my questions. Thank you, Director, for sharing information about grandparenting, because it's certainly it's been very much a part of the conversations at many of the community engagements. There seems to be unique little cases, and I think they are throughout the district, where, siblings, we want them to remain together. And actually, even on Folio 19, you're saying here, one of the questions was beneficial to children and families who have friends in proximity to their school. Many families are struggling with balancing work life and struggling to ensure that their children are delivered and picked up. So I think that's a big part of this grandfathering discussion, where parents are concerned that, they're going to be dropping one child off here, another over here. Can you just maybe provide a little bit more information or clarification on grandfathering?
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair, and I'll turn to General Manager Osterchuk and to Associate Director Reynolds for some context on how that process will unfold for our district.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, first of all, to give you some context, I did report last time through, and it has remained the same, even with the revisions that we've made to the model this time for your consideration, that we have grandparented and phased only those students that were required to be grandparented and phased because of either PARG or because of phasing and capacity considerations. I certainly can tell you that I think from a planning perspective, we have much more room to consider grandparenting. Our issue has been, as the trustee pointed out, that we sometimes don't know what people want, and we know when we assume what they want, we will sometimes get that incorrect. And so we are looking at developing a process through the transition that will allow us to identify from families what it is they're seeking. Just to give some examples, you mentioned siblings. I think that can certainly be accommodated in some regards. Certainly, we are looking at that last year of school for kids who are moving into that grade 5 level next year, grade 6 the subsequent year, where if there's a school change, they would be directed to the new school and then on to an intermediate school, for example. We do think there is some room for that. In other accommodation reviews, we have often included in the final recommendations blanket sorts of statements about grandparenting, what we would do and when. In this case, because of the extent of change and because we don't know what everyone wants, I am undertaking to tell you that I think we have a good amount of room to do some of it. We may not be able to do all of it. I'll give you an example. People have said, oh, you know, it has to do with PAR. It doesn't have anything to do with pupil accommodation review. Keeping more than 50% of kids back at the sending school is absolutely no issue from a numbers perspective when it comes to the pupil accommodation guidelines. What it does have to do with numbers, though, is the capacity of that school to keep all those children and whether or not that puts strain on the school itself from a utilization standpoint. And we would also be concerned with the receiving school, the school to which kids are directed, to make sure that they had a viable enough program to start. If everybody holds back, there's no program that can be started. So while I would say there is good room to look to do more grandparenting, and certainly specific cases where we've heard concerns that I think could largely be addressed by it, it may not be able to be accommodated across the district to the extent to which we'd like it.
Thank you, General Manager Ostrovchuk. I'll turn it over to the Associate Director just for some timelines and additional input as context.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, just a comment to begin with. You know, this is certainly a reality for many of our families now in the status quo. Although I don't think we've had a chance to look at it in detail, I can only imagine in a reduction of grade configurations and a reduction in the number of program offerings we have that we'll actually see this situation improve for many of our families should these changes be adopted. That being said, I know planning has been very busy up until this point, just working through the boundaries. So once we have a decision on whether or not we're moving forward with these changes, we'll, as the manager was saying, the general manager was saying, have to find out exactly where and what we might be able to accommodate. We hope to, by the end of this school year, be able to communicate to families a timeline and process through which these decisions will be made. And we would hope to have all these decisions made for families through the fall of this year, well in advance of the changes being implemented in September of 2026. That's our preliminary thinking, but we're fairly optimistic we'll be able to meet that timing.
Thank you for that. And I guess similarly, cross-boundary transfers has also been a lot of many discussions. You know, are students able to stay in the school that they're currently staying in?
Madam Chair, through you, we have accounted for those students who have who are on cross-boundary transfers at that sending school. We have not, we don't know exactly who they are. They're just part of the overall numbers, but we would undertake that should there be a program for them, and we think there is in most cases, that those students can stay at that school at least until the end of that grade configuration in that school. It doesn't necessarily mean they get to change a path to intermediate or high school, just as it does now with the transfers. You're transferring into a specific school, that transfer would be honored.
Thank you. There seems to be a lot of case-by-case individuals cases where a student, and I think you referenced this already, where a student may be in grade 5 and then have to go to a different school, grade 6, then back to the other school, grade 7 and 8. Can we minimize that? Because it's a lot of transition in a very short period of time for a student.
Madam Chair, through you, we have tried to minimize that already. Certainly as clarification, for example, this time through in one of the areas that we made amendments to, Convent Glen, Chapel Hill, Chateauneuf, we clarified that the new East Urban Community School that will be built and open by September 2026 will open as a K-5, not a K-6. We are looking at those individual cases right now, I hope, that we can do better as we go along to identify those kids and maybe take care of some of that. But I think the grandparenting clause may be the thing that, that kicks in for it. I don't know that we'll be able to cover all of the cases in the time in which we are given before decisions are made.
Thank you for that. And I know we're supposed to be sort of district and less specific, zone specific, but we've heard the expression hotspots a lot throughout this conversations. And there are some communities, areas that are, you know, haven't been referenced in the latest revised report. And, you know, are other areas being prioritized, or are we giving, you know, equal opportunity to all areas?
Madam Chair, through you, hotspot is not my term. I can tell you that on the feedback we received, we got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails, and I can assure you that everyone that came across our desk, my desk, was read and considered. If you look on page 8 in the report, you'll see the areas in which we made revisions. Some of them came about as a result of one email. And so somebody said, gee, could you do this? And it seemed reasonable and something we hadn't thought of, and so we did it. Also, when you hear from great numbers of people in a community, you want to call it a hotspot, go ahead, but it's obviously a flag when you hear from great numbers of people in a community to look at it and see what you could do. We looked at every single comment that came across, and we did what we could.
Thank you for that, because certainly in the rural community, Osgood, Greeley, Castro Valley, Metcalfe, they were not heard. They're feeling they weren't heard in the revised report, and there was concern raised that maybe they weren't considered a hotspot.
Madam Chair, just to clarify, just because you weren't listed in one of the revisions does not mean you were not heard. We heard everyone. And as I said, we did what we could and what we felt was reasonable going forward, and also looking at it with perhaps more information than people from individual schools have. We are trying to look down the line for stability. We are looking at interconnectedness with other schools. And so it is a complex issue. But if somebody wrote in, commented in the survey, called in, we had a number of phone calls as well, they were heard. And so I just want to assure you that we went through everything that we got.
Thank you for that. And with just 15 seconds left, and that just brings me to the concerns around PARD. You know, how did we incorporate the guidelines within that, you know, to ensure that the community has been, their concerns have been met?
Before I hand it over to staff, Trustee Jenkins, would you like to go? Yes, okay. Please go ahead.
Madam Chair, with regard to the pupil accommodation review guidelines, you know, start this. I was actually involved at the ministry level on a number of iterations of the pupil accommodation review, so I think it's something that we are very well familiar with. And so we are not particularly concerned with that aspect of compliance. When it comes to compliance, we know that we made an active decision to keep at least 50% of kids at their home school, and in doing so would qualify as exempt from the pupil accommodation review policy, even if someone did determine that we were subject to it. So we did that through an abundance of caution. Really, the nature of the pupil accommodation review is to ensure that there is adequate consultation going forward on this. And I don't think when anybody looks at the number of, you know, zone meetings, consultation meetings, evening meetings, day meetings, afternoon meetings that we had on this particular matter with specific outreach to specific communities that we don't often hear from, I think this is probably the most extensive communication that we have ever done. And so I think in spirit, that was very much upheld.
All right, continuing down my speakers list, I do have a lengthy speakers list, but I'm just going to call them out in groups of 3. So our next 3 are Trustee Kaplan-Murth, then Trustee Presley, then Trustee Dixon. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I'll need to go back on the speakers list for sure. So I have a few different items. One is that I wanted to speak for SEAC, which I'm a member of the board of SEAC, the committee rather. And SEAC passed a motion in our last meeting on April 2nd, which I just wanted to bring to the attention of the trustees and the staff. And that motion was, however, before the revised proposals were available. Although there is now a motion to a friendly amendment to it, so we'll see how that goes. But the motion was based on there being 39 special education specialized program classes that were going to be closed, and the motion carried. Be it resolved that SEAC recommends that the Board of Trustees reject the closure of the then 39, potentially changed now to 26, specialized program classes identified in the elementary program review's proposed model. So I think it's important. That is feedback that we've received from organizations that represent students with all kinds of different disabilities, and they are an advisory committee to us. So that's the first item. I just want to.
Trustee Kappelmarth, just
Yep.
before, I would just like to add too that that motion that you were actually talking about is on our April 15th agenda, just for everyone's awareness as well. So it will be discussed there. I just wanted to highlight that before you continued.
Perfect. Thank you. Now I want to move our minds back to a Committee of the Whole report from June of 2021. And in fact, I've read through many old reports, all of which talk about disproportionality indices and underrepresentation of particular groups in French immersion, and looking at those disparities and calling for the OCDSB to finally do something about those disparities. In the 2021 report, early French immersion program was reported to have 1.5 to 2.8 times lower proportions of English language learners, students who identify as Indigenous, males, those with special education needs, and those residing in lower income neighborhoods relative to the representation in the overall student population. The English with Core French program tended to yield lower achievement outcomes, and immersion programs yielded higher ones. And differences in outcomes, those disparities, were evident, again, for all of those students who were identified as living in lower income neighborhoods, male students with special needs, and students whose families identified as First Nations, Inuit, Black, Indigenous, Latino, Middle Eastern, other races not listed, boys or men, gender fluid, trans boys or men, and gender identity not listed, and any other disability. I could go on, but we have gone on. And in fact, that data refers to years of clear disparities. So I will continue when I am back on the speakers list.
Thank you, Trustee Kappelmarth. The director does want to provide response, and then we already have you on second time speaker.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Very quickly, appreciate what Trustee Kappelmarth is bringing forward. A quick comment on the SEAC report, and I really feel for our committees, much like our public, when we are in the process of a revised proposal and they're not aware of it and working on things. I won't speak on behalf of the chair, but I do know for some of our committees, we have provided an opportunity to speak even at delegation night. So if there is a friendly adjustment to a proposal based on the original plan, not the revised, that SEAC would like to bring forward, of course, staff will look at that and consider it. And I don't know if the delegation night is of interest to them, but I just want to make the point. I appreciate what you're saying there. In terms of the disparities in programs, I think Trustee Kappelmarth, you're getting at the heart of the work we're doing here. We're trying to bring forward a plan that addresses some of these concerns. And I want to speak to it on two fronts very, very quickly. One is, the work ahead of us, as difficult as this change management process is, isn't the hardest work. The hardest work of us is post-decision, when we need to, as an organization, ensure we have a culture in place with checks and balances that allow for students to choose from an enhanced English or a French immersion program and support them through that pathway. We understand, even in the same household, some students will choose one, some will choose the other. But we've got work to do as an organization to make sure we're supporting those students, regardless of which program they choose, and other work to do from a leadership perspective to ensure that both of those programs are valued, enhanced, supported, structured, celebrated, so that we haven't got a dynamic where one is favorable and the other one isn't. So a lot of what you're speaking to the June 2021 reports, and I don't have them in front of me, but I appreciate what you're saying, is the work ahead of us in our organizational culture to make sure that both programs are respected and represented, knowing that our plan is not perfect, but that moves this work forward exactly in the spirit of what you're talking to.
All right, thank you. And Trustee Kaplan-Murphy, have you on second time speaker, Trustee Presley, and then Trustee Dixon, and then Trustee Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I would like to go on the second time speakers list as well. I just want to extend my thanks to staff for the revised proposal as well as the reports and appendices. I specifically want to mention in this section of my speaking time some of the information I read in Appendix B. I'm grateful that on pages 49 to 50, we talk about some of the concerns that our community are having in regards to the EPR, and I'm grateful that that was listed. Specifically in relation to that, when we look at page 4 and 5 of Appendix B of the report 25-022, it states that we use the Thought Exchange AI Advisor tool, and I appreciate that there's a little bit of methodology given with reason as to why we did that. However, I've received a lot of commentary from various members of different committees that I'm a part of, as well as just the general public, and that they don't feel that their answers were being captured accurately. And I myself, as part of the exercise with the Alternative Schools Advisory Committee, inputted all my information and thoughts, and the summary that was given to me, I feel did not accurately reflect the commentary that I provided to it. So I just wanted to flag that for everyone's attention, and that maybe we'd want to do a little bit more digging into that. I understand that a lot of work has gone into it. I am concerned about the use of AI in collecting data, especially when this is still a fairly new technology for us to be implementing. I did see the sources where we looked at some of the data as to the reasoning of why we've added that in, and I've gone over that. However, I'm just hoping if I can get some comments as to the reasoning of why we are using AI and how confident we are that the data is being collected in a thoughtful and meaningful way.
Through you, Madam Chair, I do want to turn it over to our strategic business analyst, Kenan Amirkajik, to provide a bit of an update on the utilization of the tool through Thought Exchange, both the artificial intelligence and, of course, his work as an analyst.
Hi there. Thank you for the question. Through you, Chair. So one of the pieces of the Thought Exchange's AI tool that's pretty interesting and different from just plugging it into Gemini or into ChatGPT is that it's a contained data universe, which means it's not pulling information from outside of what you're providing it, which is usually heavily influenced by all the other analytics that come into an AI tool. So it works with what you feed it. So if you are providing insight into what the elementary program review is, what the feedback is specific to, what questions you're asking, that's where it's drawing the information from. I will also say that in the data analysis, it wasn't just left to, it wasn't just AI kind of unleashed and it was what it was. It was, as you said, a tool. So once the AI would spit out whatever it spit out, it was down to me as the data analyst. And also we had a Thought Exchange research partner who also helped us go through the data and make sure that what was spat out with AI was what we were hearing. And so it wasn't, there was still an engagement with the raw data beyond just AI doing that on its own.
Thank you for that comment. I appreciate it. I appreciate your comments regarding it being a contained data universe. And I'm mindful of the fact that staff at our district were inputting the data for it within that containment. I just felt it important to express my own experience with the Thought Exchange platform, in that my responses were not accurately captured. And I've received that feedback from others as well. Moving on to some other items in the report. I'm wondering if I could get a comment in regards to the alternative program being phased out, or the entry dates, my apology, to be for junior kindergarten. I'm just wondering on behalf of the ASAC community, why wasn't grade 1 used as the final cutoff for the entry point, as that's when the ministry requires us to be registering students as kindergarten is optional. I'm hoping to just get a little bit of understanding around that so I can relay that back to the committee. Thank you.
Madam Chair, we're not looking at certainly taking anyone who is in grade 1 in the alternative program and changing that in any way. We were simply looking at intake into the program and looking for this coming September to be the last date for that. For calculation purposes, we need to know, you know, for staffing, for projections, what have you, how many kids would be in the intake we'd look into the program. And so that seemed a logical place to start with it.
Thank you very much. I thank everyone for their responses. I will go on the next speaker's list.
All right, thank you, Trustee Presley. Trustee Dixon?
Through you, Chair. I guess my questions will be more for the director. Where students are, and a follow-up to what my colleague Jennifer asked, where students are grandfathered into a school out of boundary as a result of the 2025-2026 EPR, and they have younger siblings, will they be able to be grandfathered into that school also?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm going to ask for General Manager Ostrovachuk to give a perspective. I'll add to it with a couple of comments.
Madam Chair, as I said, I think there is lots of extra room to look at grandparenting. But for us to make those assumptions and really calculate how much room we have to know what people want. Right now, with the amendments to the grade configurations, quite frankly, there should be very little sibling issue that is left unless we are talking about the grades that are phasing in to other schools. For example, I'll go back and use the alternative schools. If the alternative program is in that school and a new program is phasing in, it will start with the lower grades. So the sibling issue may be that not that both siblings can go to that new school. There won't be a grade for the older sibling. It's a question of whether or not there's capacity at the sendings at the older sibling school to have that sibling go back. I do think there is room for that sort of consideration, but I don't know the scale of the desire of people, nor do I know exactly what people want. And so we haven't made any blanket sort of recommendations to you about grandparenting. It's certainly our intent to do as much as we can. I do have to tell you that there will be cases where we cannot do it. And to give you parameters about that, again, if the original school, the sending school, is going to have a really bad capacity problem that will kick out the need for more classrooms, more staff, or it just cannot sustain the numbers with the children grandparented back, that may be an issue where we might not be able to accommodate some desires. And there may be an issue with the receiving school, the new school where programs are started. If everyone is grandparented back and there's no one to start the new program, that can also be problematic. That said, I think that's a rather small percentage of what we're talking about. I do think in a number of cases that were raised, we do have some good ability to look at things. And so we look forward to doing that and hopefully answering and reassuring a bunch of families on some of the desires that they want.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Dixon. So I have Trustee Nash, then Trustee Forte, then Trustee Bell. Trustee Nash?
Yes, and thank you, and through you, Chair. I will again mention the grandfathering, and I appreciate the comments that were made, and I appreciate your comments, General Manager Ostrovachuk. But again, I would like the process to be sooner rather than later, and just because, again, particularly with, I think you're touching again, the two schools, and it involves an alternative school, and but that whole problematic for parents, you know, with siblings walking to school with the other siblings, so there's daycare concerns, there are different times of drop-offs and on a whole other slew of concerns that they need to, that they're thinking about, they're anxious about. So the process in place sooner than rather than later. On that point, on another point, Director, you mentioned the integration of the tenants. Could you, will there be a structure around that?
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the question, Trustee Nash. One of the things that'll come forward in next week's complementary report on implementation considerations is the beginning of a series of frameworks around our renewed approach or refreshed approach to teaching and learning across the district, a literacy-based framework, as well as the tracker mechanisms for us as an organization. We'll look in that approach, although it won't be completed and final. That's some of the work that'll happen over the next 16 plus months to honor and integrate elements of the tenants, some of which we feel confident are not only happening right now, but thriving and being celebrated, including multi-age groupings in 35 to 45% of our classes anyway, along with the other pieces. So we'll look through that teaching and learning approach to highlight those tenants, to honor their existence and the great practices that they've been and that they continue to be throughout the organization.
I raise this because during the delegations and in emails that we receive, time and time again, whether it's from the families or from the students themselves spoken up, we hear about how they felt valued and empowered to learn and thrive. And these are very good schools, very good educators. When you particularly look at the high number of, I mean, I believe in some of the alternative school, there are high as 40% of the children that have IEPs. When you compare that to a regular school, you're looking at 6%, and they don't have additional resources. They don't have additional EAs. They don't have even additional training. So there's something, for a better word, magical about, I know we have a lot of good schools, but there's certainly among the cadre of our staff in our alternative schools, I mean, they're doing wonderful things. So again, when we look at the structure, what is it with the tenants and with these, obviously it's always the educator's work is so important, the person that's in front of the classroom, but truly they're quite remarkable and certainly I would highly suggest that you look among them in terms of best practices, in terms of how they can be shared.
All right, thank you, Trustee Nash. We have Trustee Forty.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just a quick comment about staff movement. And I just want to make sure that we are supporting our educators the best we can, because obviously this is a big change for them as well as our students. Something that's come forward to me is the fact that our school year calendar that we've just approved for 25-26, we're not ending on a PD day. Staff is asking, could they have time to move? I know I'm getting a little bit into the weeds here, but I do want to make sure that our educators are being supported in this.
Thanks. Through you, Madam Chair, I think Trustee Forty, you raise a really good point. We'll work with our Federation Union partners in the context of the approved school year calendar, find ways to, fortunately with the revised proposal, we've got less movement as well on a staff front, but to find ways to ensure that we have a transition plan in place. I know there will be some staff movement that will go through some process anyway, but also for any staff who are moving, find ways to help facilitate that to the best of our ability. A point well raised, we'll look to address that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Forty. Trustee Bell.
Great. Thanks, everyone, and good evening. Starting off with my gratitude to the staff, especially our general manager, for all of the work that has been undertaken on, in particular, the boundary review and, of course, for the revised proposal that we're discussing this evening. I do want to say that I've heard from my constituents that in many cases they did feel heard and can actually see their feedback in the revised proposal. So again, thank you for that. I'll start off with the issue of grandparenting. I hear that the intent is to do as much as possible. I'm within what is possible. My question is, if we don't know what people want, do we have the ability, the technology to find out, to do, for example, sample surveys of different areas and different schools that could potentially be at risk, to find out if, for example, there are certain schools that can't have blanket grandparenting, to check that off, because we now know. If there's only certain areas that can do grandparenting, then we would, or certain grades that could do grandparenting, then we would know. So is that something that has been considered through you, Chair?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think Trustee Bell, you raise a good point. That's part of what Associate Director Reynolds spoke to is once we have a decision in place for the balance of May and June, that final 6 weeks of the school year, we'll look to put a process in place with timelines to address those requests over the fall, September to December of 2025, so that parents and guardians have that information, and so does staff for that matter, well in advance of the next round of planning for the upcoming school year. So we'll look to do that. Some of it will become very obvious once we have a recommendation approved to school communities, to the point that General Manager Ostfachuk mentioned. If there's no grade at the sort of homeschool or even the receiving one, it will be an obvious answer, and then we'll find a process to reach out to our school communities to ask for anyone who does have that interest. We feel the revised proposal addresses a lot of this, and we want to make sure that we don't overpromise, we underpromise and overdeliver on that front, and we think a lot of these issues will be resolved as it is. So it will be fewer than would have initially been proposed. In nature, we'll get that process going as quickly as we can, but again, once a decision is made, much of that will be clear, and we'll be able to clarify it with our school communities.
Trustee Bell, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a clarification on that. Thank you, Director. Have we thought about doing that before the decision comes to, in fact, to the table, to do that sort of survey of schools to find out what would actually be possible? And I know that it's probably not likely that we could do that across the board, but are there samples in each zone, for example, that we could do on potential areas? Thanks.
Through you, Madam Chair, really difficult to deal in the proposition, much to what General Manager Ostfachuk stated. In the hypothetical, we really need our parents, guardians, and caregivers not to look at this, well, is this a possibility? It's more, is there some hardship that they're asking us to address? This is fewer than more in nature. To the General Manager's point, we wouldn't be able to accommodate every single potential option or possibility out there anyway. So we'd rather not deal in the hypothetical that way, especially because, to be frank, the current realities of a change process like this are complicated enough. We would look post decisions to then open some process up through our Associate Director that looks truly when there is a hardship or a consideration for us to look at, rather than a wide array of what is potentially possible, knowing already on the program review front that we are working within a number of restrictions. So we're approaching it more based on if there's genuinely a need, and we will try to address that to the best of our ability where we can.
Thank you. I know for me, Director, it would be much more feasible for me to make my decisions if it was based on sample data. So if we could consider that would, before the vote comes up, I'd be grateful for that. The number one thing that I think I heard through the consultation document is, with regard to special education, a plan. So what will those resources look like? Where will they go? How will we finance it? And ensure that each and every classroom has the numbers that they need for integrating various students that have special and unique needs. And so my question is, what will we have a plan for that? And I have one more question after.
Certainly. Through you, Madam Chair, and I'll turn it over to Superintendent Stout for a comment here. I will begin by saying part of what you'll receive next week is a bit of a framework to support students. It won't be a magical solution. Our needs continually outstrip our supply in any capacity. So I want to make sure that what we're looking at is not a magic bullet, magic solution in our transition implementation. I'll turn it over to the superintendent for some commentary on our evolution towards inclusion. But the hard work of teaching and learning each and every day in our classrooms and our schools will remain a reality this upcoming school year and all the future ones ahead of us. I don't want to create a false illusion that in this program review, we're going to present some shiny proposal that addresses every single concern in our classrooms. I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you so much. And through you, Chair, I appreciate what the director just shared and that this is part of a proposal that is really about that evolutionary work. And so when we think about the resources that would come from the phasing out of the specialized program classes, our intention is to reinvest those resources into special education, into the regular classrooms. And so we are, and we continue to have conversations about how to support the diversity of learners. I think it's important to note that the majority of students with special education learning needs are met within the regular classroom. And the revised proposal, those learners, the intention is that their learning needs will be supported in a similar way through the tiers of intervention to ensure that we are creating individual learning plans that meet their needs. We are talking collectively as a group within the Learning Support Services Department about what the roles of each of the central team members could be, but also how those supports within schools currently can be properly activated to ensure that we are looking at the resources we have available to us, and we're putting them to the learning profiles of students that present to us.
Can I go ahead with my last question? Chair?
Yes, sorry, Trustee Bell. Go ahead.
Thanks. It has to do with the alternative tenants and also with the Algonquin protocol and Indigenous knowledge and how that will be integrated into the program. I really like with the special education, I'm asking, when will we see the plan? When will we see the finances? With the tenants, I'm asking, when will we actually be able to see how, for example, non-competition and potential no grades will be incorporated? Thanks. When will that happen?
Through you, Madam Chair, in part, one of the pieces around the Algonquin protocols, of course, we will provide our Indigenous scholar, Lori Robinson, with the time to engage our communities on that, both our Indigenous and non-Indigenous, because there's learning on Indigenous ways of knowing and living and learning that'll be applicable across our entire system. That work is already well underway. An exciting first meeting last month of the IEC with Lori and Arnold, our two scholars led by Lori Robinson, the lead. That will happen over the next number of months, and then a report brought forward within the context of likely the upcoming school year on how we can apply that learning. Again, not only across the elementary contracts, but the entire system. So that's really important for us. It'll honor the Algonquin protocols, including the importance of listening and active listening, which is one of the protocols we're currently underway to just hear the perspectives shared, strengths to celebrate, areas of growth. With respect to the tenants, again, our frameworks for learning, teaching in a revised or refreshed teaching and learning approach will incorporate those. We do need to provide grades as part of a ministry expectation. So there are some tenants that won't be quite as universally in place as others, but that's the spirit of the work ahead, that we'll look to integrate those in our work. It won't be a play-by-play of every single classroom across the district. This will be a framework and approach to give a sense to the Board of Trustees of the nature of our teaching and learning and the move forward. So that's coming up in part next week and in part across what will be quarterly reports this upcoming school year around the transition implementation plan for the district as we implement the program review.
All right, Trustee Bell, I see a nodding head, so I can go down my speakers list. I'm going to go with yes, and if you would like to be added back on to second time speaker, please raise your hand. So the next group of three I have is Trustee Lyra, then Trustee Scott, and then Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you. So I want to start by talking about the goals of this review. When we set out to do this work, it was to solve systemic inequities at schools that were struggling. They were predominantly English-only schools. They were predominantly in low-income neighborhoods. And by any metric that we choose to measure, they were not succeeding to the levels of the other schools in our district. I am less happy with the revisions than I was with the original one, because there are, in this revision, still low-income English-only schools that are historically not succeeding. And so I have a very hard time passing something that does not solve the problem. And I appreciate that we got a great deal of feedback. My concern is that the feedback that we got was predominantly from those with social capital, an understanding of how to lobby trustees, an understanding of how to advocate, an understanding of English strong enough to fill out our applications. And so I am quite concerned that we have changed the model that we originally started with based on a subset of our community's feedback, and it is going to further reinforce or support the existing inequities in the system. I appreciate that for some areas, this may be better. I appreciate that for some areas, the proposal hasn't changed. But there are areas that it has changed, and that concerns me. I'd love a staff comment on that.
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair, appreciate Trustee Lyra what you're suggesting in the revised proposal that staff is bringing forward. And I asked staff to put on the tables the initial proposal, quite frankly, before we ever got into boundaries or configurations, which has garnered the most input. I will bring the Board of Trustees to a comment on page 3, first paragraph, which states, and I quote, "With respect to community-based education, some exceptions may apply in the district, with a handful of schools that will offer only enhanced English or French immersion." All of what's being brought forward in the revised proposal adheres to the spirit of the overarching principles in that document. It was well known to staff, and I would say to the Board of Trustees as a whole, that what we were going to bring forward, no matter what, was not going to be perfect. That our zones, our areas, our schools, our configurations, our boundaries, our programs are not neatly organized into square boxes on a grid where you can simply pull an element out of one and place it in the next box and all stays equal. What staff look to do, and I really appreciate the comment around the remaining 5 English-only sites and the remaining 6 French immersion-only sites. It adheres to what we as staff knew would be something we would ultimately end up with. We feel on balance, we have taken 30 single-track sites and reduced that down to 11. We have taken 10 additional English and MFI sites and offered the more consistent dual track of EE and FI, Enhanced English and French Immersion. By all measures as staff, and I can speak to having sat here long before August 1st of 2023, this work, the work in the revised proposal, moves the work of equity and of program quality and accessibility along the needle to an extent that I almost couldn't have imagined or dreamed of. Do I profess it's perfect? No. Pulling on the string by force-fitting dual-track schooling across all of our sites, and that was what the Board of Trustees asked staff to do, and staff did it in the original proposal. We did it under the goodwill of going out to our communities for feedback, and we heard feedback that isn't a sole factor that's in isolation of anything else. If it were, we'd be at an original proposal. We went out for feedback and we heard from our communities that forcing that everywhere was going to cause tremendous hardships in other factors or areas. I understand those areas, those factors are not all weighted equally. But what staff has done is genuinely listen to feedback, and I'm going to be honest here, having been accused at those sessions that I had a plan in my back pocket that was going to be ramrodded through this organization without having heard a single piece of input. That's not true, and it's not the case, and you've got it in front of you tonight, that we listened to the feedback we got. I'll be honest with the Board of Trustees. If this was to be done in absolute or absolutism, then why did we do a consultation? That should have come forward on April 2nd of 2024, and you should have instructed staff to simply make it happen, period. That's not what staff is bringing to you. Staff is bringing to you a revised proposal that's multifaceted in nature, incredibly complex, and weighed the balance of all of those elements. And I will tell you, I know staff very well. We did a great job of managing all those pieces, bringing down 30 single-track sites to 11. Not perfect. When there are other less cumbersome limitations on us as an organization, we'll revisit it like we do each and every year. We've brought a sensible and sound plan that we can action. You'll see more about that next week, but that adheres to what we released in early January to our communities.
I believe my comments have been misconstrued. I am not concerned about the single-track French schools, provided every school offers French immersion. I am solely concerned with the existence of English-only schools in low-income communities that are historically not successful. And so I want to say, like, I appreciated in the first plan that there were 4 French-only sites that had to go because we couldn't make the numbers work. I was willing to let that live. If we had to go double that number and go to 8 French-only sites to make the numbers work, provided we have French immersion at every school, I'd be willing to accept that. It's not the single-trackedness that is my issue. The issue that I have is the English-only single-trackedness, because it is the English program that has historically not been successful.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think there's a few things in this discussion. One is the nature of our approach to English programming, and part of our desire in the move forward in a dual track offering across predominantly the entire district is to change that viewpoint that English taken in isolation as a program has some connotation of being lesser than. And I think we've got work to do in that area. I grant you, Trustee Lyra, that there's a great deal of work we have to do in that area. Having said that, in all of this, there was no opportunity, no luxury for staff to ever take any one factor in isolation. That we would pull on one string so hard in a webbed organization that it would potentially break other strings. We tried not to do that. We understand as we pulled on some strings, they'd impact another set of strings, including the issues with grade configurations. JK to 3 and 4 to 8 is just one example. The other issues around, quite frankly, only having so many students in a certain area and we can't produce more of them. So the offering of dual track in areas, and there are some that were more difficult to manage than others, I think you know them well, was not easy because of the empty pupil places. That was forcing us into other grade configurations. What staff did, and I won't speak for General Manager Ostrovachuk, but I can speak for what I've witnessed in the work she's done, meeting with her just about every day over the last number of months, is that they balanced all of those factors. And that forcing one was clearly going to have a detrimental effect in other areas on the organization. And you have staff's commitment that as we evolve as an organization and we can return to some of these parameters over time, that we'll do so. But that what we've put in front of you is optimized that range of factors to consider, not solely the program offering alone. But I appreciate, Trustee Lyra, the spirit of what you were getting to and what you as a board instructed staff to do in the original work ahead on this, and that staff has done its very best to optimize the dual track offerings. And again, we've got it here in 110 plus of 121 sites.
I appreciate the complexity. I appreciate that you have weighed multiple factors. What I am saying is I think you have misweighted the factors, because I believe that a higher weighting needs to be given to not having English-only schools in low-income communities. I'm going to go back on the list because I don't think I can make a good point in 12 seconds.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lyra. Trustee Scott?
Thank you. And I appreciate the discussion that has just occurred because the first question I wanted to raise with staff relates to the whole issue of school reputations and rankings. That's something I certainly heard from a number of families about, well, this school is a high-rated school. I don't want my child to go to the school that is a low-rated school, which is all very well. However, if you're relying only on the EQAO scores, and particularly if you're relying only on the Fraser Institute rankings, there are a lot of schools that we have that have a low ranking. But if you actually look at what is happening in those schools, they are doing an incredibly good job because they are really lifting kids up. And so I would appreciate some comment from staff about how rankings and ratings can change and whether or not the ones that many families look at actually have very much validity in the real world.
Through you, Madam Chair, without getting us into sleeping bags on a topic that could be a conversation for an entire night. From my perspective, the greatest concerns we have in this district in terms of academic achievement are not in our neediest sites. They're in our leafy suburbs, where satisfaction due to social capital is much higher, and the concerns that stare you in the face in some of our more needy sites are more pressing and require more immediate action. And your point around some great gains made in those areas is one not to be brushed aside. I will also comment that I've been a principal and a member of staff, as a teacher in multiple capacities in some of our most needy sites, and that some of the feedback around grade configurations, and I want this to be clear, and the split of JK to 3 and 4 to 8 didn't come from our most affluent only. It came from some of our community members with larger families who rely on the older sibling to walk not only the younger siblings to school, but they walk their cousins to school as well. And that for a number of our immigrant families, when they can't see the school, there's a different dynamic playing through their mind. I can speak to that firsthand. There was concern about the breakup of JK to 3 and 4 to 8 from some of our neediest communities when they didn't feel they could get to their kids quick enough, not knowing the city, and telling them to head off to some other street that they don't know where it exists is a factor. I'm not saying it's the only factor, it's just that it is a factor. So I don't want this misunderstanding that the feedback that staff took into account was only from the more privileged, affluent, fortunate, whatever you want to call it. There were multiple considerations taken into mind by staff in the feedback we received.
Thank you for that. I would like to give a shout out, if I may, to Superintendent Dua and the FACE and SATE teams because they did an amazing job of being able to engage with parents in a lot of these schools where parents otherwise might not have taken part in the consultation. Second question I had is a little bit different because, again, this may go also to concepts of privilege and equity. But I've heard a lot of questions about how the schools will be resourced, particularly if there is a change in the programs in a school or if there is a change in the grades in a school. Certainly, I know that in previous situations when we've been opening new schools or moving large numbers of kids because we did a big boundary change, typically some of the resources of the schools have been divided so that the French immersion resources, some of them would go with the kids who were going to the new French immersion program in the other school, or some of the English program resources would be going with the English kids if they were the ones who were moving. But what kinds of planning will be happening around that? Because certainly school councils have invested a lot of energy in many schools to try to build up library collections and other resources within the school. How is that expected to work?
Through you, Madam Chair, Superintendent Laverne in Program Services and his team are working on those preliminary elements right now. In next week's report, You'll get not only an overview of one example of a framework, we picked the literacy one because it ties beautifully to dynamic bilingual teaching and learning in English and en français. You'll also get a preliminary oversight to the kind of planning around resource allocation, much like the capital plan, where we do this every single year, and we will have a priority to the schools we need to change. It's much reduced in the revised plan, which is, I think, a helpful sign in how we manage this transition. You'll also get a bit of an overview, and we've done this before. A good example is when we instituted full-day kindergarten. We had a template of the resources for every kindergarten class, and if one class had a water table and the next one didn't, or one had two and we were able to move one over, we did that kind of thing for full-day kindergarten. That's the plan at the elementary level. That's the exciting part of the opportunity to refresh programming at the elementary level so that every classroom has a base standard. Both for enhanced English and French immersion. We will reallocate existing resources to the best of our ability, and then we'll have a plan in place for the purchase of resources, which we are already mapping out the cost to make sure we've got that in place for the fall of 2026. It's not cheap, and we have to be fruitful and resourceful with what we've got and what we need to purchase, but that's the plan in a preliminary way next week. And then, to be honest, the work of the transition planning team led through Superintendent Laverne and Associate Director Reynolds this upcoming school year, but you'll get a bit of a sense of it next week. You won't get a detailed list of all the resources, but a sense of how we'll plan that out. That's the work of the next 16 months.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. I'm going to go to Trustee Jennings, and then I'm going to call a 10-minute break. So Trustee
Is
Jennings?
this for second time speakers?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Chair. My questions are going to be my zone specific, and in particular, the rural area. When you're creating the boundaries, do you take into consideration, how do you take into consideration new development? Or, and also, you know, Greeley Public School has a septic bed and a well system. Is all of that considered in creating your boundaries?
Madam Chair, through you, it is. Certainly, we do look at a horizon for development and what is upcoming. Some of it in the rural area is a little more difficult than those urban area developments and large plans of subdivision. In the rural area, you're talking about usually a store of country estate lots that can be built on from time to time, rather than large tract subdivision developments. When we're looking at a school like Greeley you used, certainly we know that by dual tracking that school, it will have a higher population than it traditionally has had. But we absolutely look at the portable capability, the septic capability, when we're examining facilities across the board, whether or not it's a rural school or an urban school. We look at how many portables can be utilized if necessary, the space inside the school, all of those things are taken into consideration. I would suggest to you the horizon for development lands that we're looking at is probably about a 5-year horizon. We certainly know what's coming after the fact. We know what's coming 20, 25 years from now, but the phasing of that and the approvals of those subdivisions and development plans is much hazier. So we try and rely on the immediacy of what we know is in process.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. Well, and using Greeley Elementary School again as an example, so with the EPR, it's going to be projected at 120%, and if you are also calculating in the option of maybe adding in a portable, is there not concerns though for the well and septic capability?
Indeed, there are, and that is taken into account. Every school, at the time of site plan control, when the school is initially built, even though that school is an older one, there were certain potentials taken into account with that school, and that is one of the reasons. I know there was some discussion back and forth about Greeley's boundary. We kept it a fairly tight old police village boundary for that very reason, because we don't want it to go over. And when you are dual tracking a school, it tends to be less efficient, if you will, than a single track school as far as classroom utilization goes.
Thank you. So again, for the rural area, when you determined the boundaries, there was questions on, keeping neighborhoods together, keeping communities together. And I guess the example was the neighborhoods of Old Prescott, Old Prescott Road and Stagecoach Road. Are you trying to, when you're planning these boundaries, really trying to keep communities together?
We are, but I have to tell you that despite the principles outlined in the document the director showed you, when it comes to the planning department and what we can do with communities and how people define those, we are far more restricted. When you have a school of 200 pupil places, sometimes that does not align with the local community and what they feel is their community boundary. Again, I have a certain familiarity with Greeley, having worked in the former township for a number of years, so I know that area well. Greeley is defined as anything sort of along Mitch Owens Road, just outside Manotick until past Bank Street. So nobody really knows how that community is defined. It can certainly go as south as Prescott and Stagecoach Road. The school, however, will not hold that. And so it seemed folly for us to define the community as the community may have defined it, given the restrictions of the school itself.
Thank you. And actually, this question will be for you, Director. There's been a lot of concern, though, that the French instructors, there's currently a shortage. If we're offering French immersion at all these different schools, how can we support these students with French instruction?
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair. I appreciate Trustee Jenikins' the question. It's come up before. One of the things that Superintendent Laverne will show next week is a revised model for time allocation at the elementary level that's based on 60-minute blocks and not 40-minute blocks, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but with the evolution of our timetabling and scheduling, the ability to shift to 60-minute blocks versus 40 has reduced greatly for Superintendent Lehman and employee services and staff in that domain. The number of dangling pieces of staffing where we have to fit teachers into additional slots to cover, in addition to the choppiness of the preparation time that we provide them. That more efficient and effective model for time allocation has created additional staffing efficiencies that are able to cover the sites that we would be introducing French immersion to. And to give context, we already have French immersion in some offering in the vast majority of our elementary schools anyway. So it's not as huge a context as one might think it is, as if it was some new introduction of a program everywhere. So that'll be part of the implementation overview we'll provide next week, both through Superintendent Laverne and Superintendent Lehman, that shows the coverage that keeps the required French staffing we look for each and every year within the same range as it was last year and will be next year. In fact, it might be for 2026 a little bit less than what we normally chase down, but we will, much like the rest of the province and the country, still be looking for FSL qualified teachers, and we'll have to do marketing strategies, but there'll be an incredible new revised program at the elementary level at Ottawa-Carleton that'll make us very attractive to others.
Thank you. And my next question is again for you, Director. There also has been a lot of concern in terms of before school, childcare, after school, childcare, having, if siblings are separated and one is over here and one is over here, parents are picking up at the end of the day at these after school programs. Are we not able to ensure that at least the siblings are together at one place at the end of the day so parents aren't driving all over the place?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll just start with a comment to give General Manager of Extended Day Programs, Julie Sear, who's with us this evening, a moment to reach a microphone. Just for a commentary, you'll find in the revised proposal a lot of the childcare concerns that were mentioned due to the grade configuration split have been addressed. So the revised proposal takes care of a great deal of that. I'll turn it over to General Manager Sear just for a commentary. She is working with the representatives of the City of Ottawa to speak to the ongoing work of childcare, irrespective of the program review, but of course, very much pertinent to what we're doing now.
Thank you very much for the question, and through you, Chair. The revised elementary program review proactively addressed the impacts due to the grade configurations on both OCDSB Extended Day and our third-party community partners. And furthermore, at this point, I really have no grave concerns for accessibility for before and after school care beyond what was presented in the past. And furthermore, the Early Learning Department will continue to monitor any individual school needs resulting from any boundary changes. And at any time that we see within a community that there is a higher need for childcare, we do what we can based on legislation, also based on what is permitted through our contribution agreement through the City of Ottawa. And as Director has mentioned, that we are in constant communication with our systems manager at the City of Ottawa and with our community partners as well to try and reduce wait lists and find ways to support families.
I'll also ask General Manager Ostrovchuk for a comment. Thank you, General Manager Sear.
Madam Chair, through you, I just wanted to point out that when it comes to a number of those sibling concerns that people keep raising, I'll remind you that with the revised model that we've come forward with, those K-3, 4 to 8 pairings of schools are that which we had. We're not adding any new ones any further. We are revising one set of K-4 grade configurations down to K-3 to break it at a panel, but that grouping of schools is the same as the ones that we have currently. So those separation of sibling issues, other than the phasing in of some programs at some new schools where typically ALT is phasing out, should be minimized to a great extent. So not only do the grade configurations remain more consistent, so a school with a childcare, for example, is no longer turning to a 4 to 8, which is a challenge. The sibling issue has been largely taken care of.
Thank you, that's all.
Right, thank you, Trustee Jenkins. We're going to take a break now, so if everyone could be back in their seats by 8:45, that would be appreciated. All right, I would like to call the meeting back to order, and we're going to continue down our speakers list. So I have Trustee Kaplan-Murth, then Trustee Presley, then Trustee Dixon. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So we've heard tonight a lot about equity and access to education, but my comments earlier were misinterpreted because actually my point was that we're not meeting our mandate in terms of equity and access to education. We have failed because it feels a little bit like a bait and switch. I have been advocating, speaking very strongly in favor of making sure that those schools that have always experienced the most disadvantage, where we have identified through our own data, and I'm not talking about any, I'm not talking about rankings, I'm not talking about the Fraser Institute, I'm talking about our own reports, Student Achievement, Valuing Voices, SATE Inquiry. We have identified the schools that are systemically discriminated against because they don't have French immersion, whose students are disproportionately racialized, students with disabilities, students who are newcomers to Canada, immigrant families. These are the schools in Alta Vista that you are leaving without French immersion. And I have heard it said that we always said this isn't going to be perfect. But actually, if you think back to our first meeting, what we said was there are going to be loud voices that are going to push back against change, and we have to hold strong and stand up for the people who are most disadvantaged. And instead, what we have done is we have heard those voices that can lobby us, that can very effectively sway us, as Trustee Lara said, with social capital, their advocacy. We have listened to those voices. What we haven't done is listened to the voices who would be speaking to us in Arabic, in Farsi, in Somali, and in Pashto at the schools in Alta Vista. That when I met with the director and the manager, I was told we can leave those schools to languish because when the moratorium is lifted on closure of schools, those would be schools we would close. So my question is, what are we doing here? Why have we spent all of this time advocating for equity, for inclusivity, when in fact, at the end of the day, what we're not willing to do is pull the strings for those students. I understand the metaphor, you pull one string, it breaks others, but we are letting those students down. And those are the students at Arch Street Public School in Hawthorne. And when I was told first that the original boundaries were the only things that could be done, and I asked why, I was told, sorry, no dice, that's the best we can do. And then miraculously, you came back with another proposal in which you were only going to add French immersion to Featherston. And I said no. And 4 days later, you came back with a way to add French immersion to Hulse. So my question is, what is stopping you from adding French immersion to Arch Street and Hawthorne? Those are the students whose immigrant families want to be able to see the school that their children go to. And that school has to offer French immersion. The principals, the vice principals, the teachers, and the families have all advocated for that.
Trustee Kaplan-Murth, we can add you to third-time speaker.
Through you, Madam Chair. Alta Vista is an area where clearly we have more pupil spaces than we have pupils. It is the case that if a moratorium on school closures were lifted today, we would be looking at that area like we would any other area of the district, considering the optimization of our finite resources, human, material, and fiscal. And by material, I mean our properties. We have made it clear, and that staff has done its very best to manage the multitude of perspectives. And I repeat, didn't hear them from only affluent families. We heard it also from other families that the grade configurations were going to cause other challenges. Everyone, everywhere would love the offering of enhanced English and French immersion. I would love nothing more than every school to have 600 students, 300 each, evenly split between enhanced English and French immersion. That is not our reality. Over 70%, somewhere in the area of 72% of our families choose French immersion. That creates an imbalance. That means that in a school of 500, 250 don't take English. 200 don't take English. 150 don't take English. Requiring us as an organization to reconfigure numbers based on the properties we have and the ability to offer programming. And so with all due respect, Trustee Campbell-Mirth, I get what you're saying. I understand the desire of the members of the Board of Trustees to offer every program offering across the district as greatly as possible. And I think that's what staff's done with respect to the other factors we considered within the feedback that we received. And we received an abundance of feedback that some of the grade configure issues by forcing the dual tracking everywhere, especially in an area like Alta Vista, with so many empty pupil places, I'm turning it over to General Manager Ostafchuk in a moment, was going to cause other hardships that we had to weigh in the balance. If this was such an easy decision, if this change management process was lockstep like a recipe, we would have done it in and around 1999. It's not that simple for the organization. It's complicated, and it has a number of considerations to take into account. Grade configurations is one of them, but start tacking on all the others, childcare and everything else, that kind of force fitting in the Alta Vista area would have caused. I really admire and appreciate what the trustee is saying, and I'm not actually against it in principle. What I'm saying is we went out for feedback to gather the multitude of perspectives to come back and weigh that in the balance. It's not a single factor decision. It's multifaceted. And we, as staff, did our best to manage that. I'm going to throw over to General Manager Ostafchuk for a perspective on Alta Vista, because I know that it's an area that was a concern, quite frankly, prior to the program review, and that remains so even now.
Madam Chair, 2 points of clarification. I did indeed say that there were too many pupil places in Alta Vista, given the number of pupils we have in the area. We at no time said that Hawthorne and Arch would be the schools that closed. We did say that some school closures were indeed necessary in the long run to balance things out. Given what we are working with right now, however, we did come up with a plan to dual track Featherston, at which point in time I made it clear to the trustee that we were still working on the issue. In still working on the issue, we came up with a way to dual track Charles Hulse. When I felt that those investigations were over to the best of our ability, looking at what we were dealing with, I met with the trustee to inform her that we were finished with those investigations, as far as I was concerned. If you would like something that has English and French in every school and balances out enrollments, what you're looking at was the original plan that we put forward. So if you are looking for different grade configurations and to make everything else work, I'm afraid we couldn't come up with a way to do so. In Alta Vista, there are 8 schools. 5 of them are English-only schools right now. In fact, one of the 5 won't even be a school because it has an alternative program, and I have to find an entire boundary for it. When you are taking those 3 schools, Alta Vista, Pleasant Park, and Vincent Massey, and trying to take their populations to cover the rest of the schools in that area with a viable French immersion program, we did not find that we could succeed in doing that without changing the grade configurations, which is exactly why we gave you the grade configurations we gave you in the first place.
All right, Trustee Kaplan-Meier, I have you on third-time speakers list.
Thank you.
We have first-time speaker Trustee Blackburn, and then we have Trustee Presley, and then we have Trustee Bell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, as many of you know, I've been here for over 14 years now. And so I've been through a lot of different issues. I've been through a lot of consultations. I've been through a lot of boundary changes. I've been through a lot of program changes. I've been just through a lot on this board. And one of the reasons why I stay and I keep running, there are many, but one of them is because I get to work with really quality people, quality staff people who have demonstrated to me over and over and over that they really, really care about kids, our families, and our communities. Communities by the way, which they live in which they've raised their kids, are raising their kids, have grandkids, etc. And I always find it, as I've gotten to know people, and I always, when I listen to people say or tell a story about what somebody said, I'm always, in my head, I go, yeah, I'm sure they never said that. I'm positive they never said that because I know them. But, and in my experience, when people don't like the result of a consultation, they attack the consultation. When they like the result of the consultation was well thought out, it was well executed, it was great, enough public meetings, the right people were consulted, it's great. But when you disagree, you attack the consultation. And from my perspective, as I said, sitting here for this long, I can tell people that we have improved how we do consultations over the years. We have made a point of reaching out to people that we weren't reaching before. Are we ever going to reach everybody? No. I mean, that would basically, let's go door to door. It's never going to happen. It's not practical. It's not feasible. But we have improved immensely. And at the end of the day, we have to make a tough decision. I've said this before. I've said this many times before. We are leaders. Leaders have to make tough decisions. We're going to make a decision and not everybody's going to be happy. And people are going to attack the process and all of that. Staff, put out a proposal. We took consultation. Some people will claim they were listened to and some people will claim they weren't listened to because they didn't get what they want. Being listened to and getting what you want is two different things. Let's be very clear. So, and I was talking to one of the local journalists and they said, you caved to the loudest, and I just disagreed with the premise of her question. We have not. Staff, I think, have come back with a very balanced approach and have made this plan the best possible plan given the circumstances that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. Would staff like to respond to anything? I have Trustee Presley, then Trustee Bell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. As we were told earlier, we're going to focus on our individual zones right now. So just to say, I'm very thankful for the fact that my zone is lucky enough to have dual track in all schools. And I'm mindful of the challenges that getting that to happen is posed. So thank you, Karen, and your team. Appreciate you. I also have comments from the Knoxdale community saying that they're very grateful for the amendments that were able to be made for them. So thank you for that. I won't go down a list of every other school because every other school has had comments that there's issues with the boundaries, there's issues with viability. And I think we're all very mindful of that in every zone. One question I do have, and I think I understand what the answer might be, but when we look at all of the utilization rates of all of our schools, with Maryville Intermediate going up in utilization rate to 151%, I'm just wondering, will there be more portables added to that space if this plan does go through, and what is that going to look like moving forward? I'm just concerned for some of those families and some of the kids who've already said they're, not getting the same access to facilities in the building that say the high school kids are getting.
Madam Chair, through you, the utilization at Maryville is largely simply a matter of demographics, not of change to this program that saw more kids directed that way. There is a concern with Maryville High School. There's a concern with a couple of them. What we have seen is a bit of the settling of the high school level, the 9 to 12 level, to some extent, to see that settle down. And we are seeing there's a couple of years, it happens all the time, where you see like a low intake of kindergarten kids for 1 year. And right now we're going through the bulge at intermediate. It's not something that we think is going to continue. It's a blip, but Maryville's utilization is always something that we're concerned with. It's difficult with the IB program intake as well in that area, as well as community. But it is something we watch. It's not out of line with what they have had in the past. We don't think more portables are going to be required right now, but there could be in the future. We could also look to see what needs are going to exist at Maryville going forward, whether or not more space is required or some other change to catchments or something of the like. But the intermediate bulge is happening. If you look to a lot of the intermediate schools, you'll see that this time, for about a 3 or 4 year period, we had a lot of kids. And that's not unique to Maryville. It's across the district for intermediate grades.
Thank you for that. Much appreciated. Truly. I'm also very mindful that the majority of change or uncomfortable situations is happening within the core, and there absolutely are changes happening at the rural level as well. I don't mean to downplay that by any means. But I'm mindful of the core area, and I'm concerned for viability of programming at specific schools. I really appreciated Trustee Scott's comments that she raised earlier, and as well as Trustee Jenikin's comments regarding capacity at schools, as well as extended daycare program concerns. So thank you very much for that, trustees. I appreciate you guys bringing that up so I don't have to go on a big tangent. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm very happy to hear that the EPR proposal seeks to implement as many of the alternative tenants as possible into our schools across the district. However, I'm concerned about using the Alternative Schools Advisory Committee as a guiding block or someone to consult if we want to implement all these tenants throughout the schools, then it doesn't make sense to me to cancel the alternative program when we're looking to be adding that. In my opinion, I would love to see the alternative program remain and be used as actually like a pilot program or a control to guide the implementation of those tenants across the district. And I would encourage people to consider that moving forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Presley. Going down my next block of 3, I have Trustee Bell, then Trustee Lara, then Trustee Scott. Trustee Bell?
Hi, just hold on.
Trustee Bell.
Yeah, I just cleared that
Okay.
up. So thank you
Okay.
so much. Cooking for a daughter and speaking at the same time. So just given the time constraints I know we're going to have, I'm happy to go on third time speakers list in order to give Lily Miller an opportunity to speak. I do have some important points, but I can always address those with staff behind the scenes as well if there's not enough time. Can I please, Chair, through your indulgence, pass my time over?
Trustee Bell, we are going to be going to second time, after second time speaker, we'll be handing over to community partners. So if you would like to go on third time speaker, I'm going to continue down second time speaker, and then we'll be going to community partners, but you are welcome to do your questions now.
Okay, so I'm not able to give my time right now and go on to third time speakers.
Not at this time. You can go
Oh,
on
that's-
third time speakers list, but we're going to continue down our second time speakers list that I just listed, and then we're going to go to community partners.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Through you, I think that's unfortunate because I do know that it's absolutely important so that we can hear what our advisory committees are saying. And I think everyone has heard me before, and I'm going to repeat the same questions, unfortunately, because I didn't get an answer. The first one is with regard to how the special education plan will be resourced and when we will see that plan. The second is when we will see a plan for the alternative tenants and Algonquin protocols / Indigenous knowledge to be incorporated into the elementary program review, when that will happen. And the last of which is carrying on from Trustee Jennifer Jenikin's question, which is, I know that in my community, Cambridge Street School will need an after-school program. And so I'm wondering, will that information on how that will transpire and when that will transpire, that program, be made public, because I know the parents that are moving over from Devonshire and from will want to see how their children will be taken care of after school. Thanks. Those are my 3 questions.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll address 2 of the 3, then look for staff with respect to the childcare piece, if there's any specifics currently worked out. With respect to our work of the Indigenous Scholar, that's currently underway in the district. That will take a few months. Towards the end of this school year or early into the new school year, the outcomes of that report, the learnings, the key learnings that are applicable at the elementary level, but also at the secondary, in the early years, in adult and continuing education, that learning will be applied not only to an elementary program, it'll be applied across the district in terms of how we can support our Indigenous students, but also support non-Indigenous students in learning about Indigenous ways of knowing and living. So that will be work as soon as that report is wrapped up by our Indigenous scholar, much like the other 2 reports, Dr. Stephanie Arnott around dynamic bilingualism and Dr. Jillian Perrick around inclusive education. As soon as that's ready, we'll provide that. We don't have an exact date because the scholar is currently underway in the work. With respect to tenants, there won't be a separate plan on tenants that's separate from the work we're going to be doing in our teaching and learning refreshed approach overall. What we're saying is that there are elements of the tenants, like multi-age groupings, that happen currently and will continue to support the good work that happens there. And we encourage all schools, including the ones that are currently under alternative and phasing out, to continue what they're doing. There's not going to be a separate plan on alternative tenants separate from the comprehensive integrated work that's happening in teaching and learning across the district. We're just looking to honor and support that good work, but it is happening elsewhere right now, including cooperation and teamwork. Our schools are now set in a context where cooperation is banned. Again, 35 to 45% of every single classroom in this district is multi-grade already. So we'll look to integrate those tenants. There won't be a separate plan on specifying those out, singling those out. Specifically, they'll be integrated. Part of our approach here, Trustee Bell, is to ensure that we simplify what we're offering so that we can do it with greater precision, to do it better, to do it more intensively with our students, and not various splintered programs. That's part of the whole spirit of the program review. We've got too much of that going on already. We're not able to reinvest some of our resources because of it. So wanted to make those 2 pieces clear, and I'll turn it over to staff. If there's any element, the special education aspects will in part be coming forward next week, but I also want to say that some of the transition work that'll be happening over the course of the next school year in terms of the phase out of some of the SPCs in the revised model proposed. And then the Devonshire childcare, I don't know if there's a perspective on that per se from staff. That might be a more specific question. Trustee Bell will take offline.
I guess, thank you through you, Chair. My response is then what I'm hearing is I will not see a financial plan with regard to special education before I'm asked to vote on it. And I believe I'm hearing I also will not see the plan on how Indigenous knowledge and the alternative tenants will be integrated before I'm asked to vote on it. Can you just clarify that that is a correct understanding?
The second one is correct because the underpinnings of the work by the Indigenous scholar applies to all of our programming, irrespective of a review of elementary. We wouldn't be blocking that good learning from the secondary level. So when that comes forward, that's going to be applied even if there's no decision made on a program review at the elementary level. Everything stays status quo. We're still going forward with that work to apply it to our system in the current configurations we've got going. So I want to be clear that we're not hinging the program review on the elementary level to the good work of the Indigenous scholar in what we need to do, even if we weren't at the table tonight talking about anything. So I want to be clear about that. So your decision on a vote around the elementary program review, rest assured, whether you vote one way or another or don't vote at all, we're still going to be moving that good work of the Algonquin protocols, the Truth and Reconciliation, and the Indigenous scholars analysis into our work of the district, period. With respect to special education, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Stout if there's any comment around some of the fiscal aspects. We will bring forward, much like the capital plan, a bit of an overview, probably not a dollar by dollar detail, but there has been some signaling in the reports around the reinvestment as we phase out some specialized program classes. I'll turn it over to the superintendent for that perspective. But again, I want to be clear here that this is not a cost-saving measure. This is a measure that speaks to the overall overarching objectives of our program review at the elementary level. There is a reallocation that's not saving special education dollars. We'd be reallocating into the mainstream classroom from some specialized program classes, but I'll turn it over to the superintendent for spec ed.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I think that Director Buffoni kind of summarized that up for us in the sense that we have from the very beginning put forward a plan where any resources that would be taken out of specialized program class funding, that model, that service delivery model that has those services siloed into those classes, the intention would be to build a plan to have those phased back into special education programming. So that will take time, given that we are proposing a phasing out of 26 specialized program classes at this point. When we looked at what that timing would be, in general, it looked like we would be able to leverage about 20% of staffing resource within the first year of phasing. It gets to about 60% as students phase through the programs. So we'd be at about 80% of that reinvestment. And by the third year, we would be looking at about 100% reinvestment of those resources into the regular classroom to support special education learners. I think it's important to note that while those are specific resources to classroom, specific to classrooms, I think we also need to acknowledge that a lot of resourcing goes into the writing of the referrals. So that includes multidisciplinary team supports that to create assessment information. That includes our learning support teachers who are putting a lot of time together, pulling those resources together. So that would be a redistribution. We're also looking at really inputting and turning our minds to how our multidisciplinary teams can be walking alongside classroom staff and really building skills and capacity and understanding of the learning profiles of the students in the classroom. And so while there's not necessarily a fiscal plan attached to that, I think it's important to note that that shift in mindset is critical when we're looking at inclusive education practices.
Understood. And through you, Chair, I just wanted the question answered of whether or not we would see as trustees a financial plan follow prior to voting on it. I know for me, it's very challenging to vote on such substantive, significant changes to special education and other components without seeing the financial impact that it's going to have on the district. So with that, with regard to after-school programming at Cambridge, I will follow up. I think it's really important before we vote on this to give an indication to our community that in fact we have thought about it and we do have a plan in place for after school care with all of the changes that are coming. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Trustee Bell. I do see that we have a staff member that has moved to a microphone that I think is going to respond to the childcare question that you just asked.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Any early learning and childcare programming in any school must abide by ministry requirements that that requires us to ensure that any early learning and childcare before and after school program must meet the threshold of financial viability based on our contribution agreement, not only with the City of Ottawa, but also with licensing. So in order for us to provide before and after school care, we must ensure that we have sufficient amount of children that will register for before and after. Currently, it is at a minimum of 13 to 15 children. So it has to be where there is a demand and where it's financially viable. And also the city has to approve a new licensing to ensure that any funding through the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Agreement can be provided to help support families that have children in the kindergarten program. So unless, or if a community is looking to add any type of before and after school programming, such as licensed childcare, we can proceed by providing the community with a survey with certain assurances that we have sufficient amount of numbers of individuals that are looking to register full-time, and I mean before and after, and the correct amount of children so that I can meet the financial viability. Then we have to go to the City of Ottawa and then request, if they do have the financial monies that are provided to them by the province, to then accept our request for licensing. And if they do, then we have to start the licensing process that could take up to 8 months. So it is not a simple process of the early learning department just opening a before and after school program. The other option is that we can look at seeking out a third party that can offer a rec program. However, the only 3 legislatively compliant rec programs that we can have in our schools that operate a before and after school program is the City of Ottawa, the YMCA, and the Boys and Girls Club. So in that respect, that could be another option. However, it will depend, and they will have the same type of challenges as we do to ensure that they have a sufficient amount of registrants to ensure that these programs are financially viable. So it no longer exists back in the day when we just opened up a program because there was a need. We are restricted and bounded by legislation at this point.
Thank you, General Manager Sear. And just to respond to the special education prompt, Trustee Bell, there won't be any additional funding from special education aside from our grants and funds that come every spring. So this spring, you'll get a sense as soon as we receive the core education funding as well as the additional grant and fund amounts, what is allocated to special education. What we're saying here in the program review, and that applies for the program discussion as well. It's not a money saver. It's not additional money. We are reallocating our resources more effectively to support inclusion and learning trajectories for students while maintaining some specialized program classes. So this spring, you'll get a sense of the ministry's budget for special education. We know it's an area of advocacy because we need more funding in that area. There's no question, but you'll get that sense of the dollars for next school year and next spring for the following school year. What we'll present to you in the reports that you'll be able to vote on, because it's the information that we have to bring forward, considering the grants and funds we have, is what positions would be reallocated into the system based on the reduction of the number of SPCs. But it wouldn't be waiting for a decision on additional dollars. Those come through the grants as they are. We don't make any extra money on special education aside from what the ministry provides. So you'll have all the dollar amounts you need. What we'll provide to you for your decision will be the reallocation of what positions would be into standard classrooms and which ones would be for SPCs themselves. So I just wanted to make that clear. And again, that applies for the entire elementary program review. It doesn't save us money. We don't pocket money here. We don't get extra money for the program review. We're looking in spirit to, through the overarching principles, to reallocate our resources more optimally throughout the system.
All right, and Trustee Bell, I've added you to the third time speakers list. So continuing down my second time speakers list, I have Trustee Lara and then Trustee Scott.
Thanks. I'd like to talk for a moment about grandfathering or grandparenting. I have been one of the most vocal advocates for ensuring that students who would be facing 3 schools in 3 years or 2 transitions in 2 years not have to go through that. It's tough on students. So I'm really glad to hear that that is something that we are looking at. I'm a little bit concerned about what I think I heard, which is that we're going to look at grandparenting wherever we can. And I'm concerned about that because I'm concerned about program viability at the schools that are leaving, that the schools from the, of the schools that the receiving schools. Because right now we have many English-only schools that are slated to become dual-track schools under this proposal. And if we allow widespread grandparenting from the sending school, so they all stay at the sending school. I'm concerned that those English only schools will not have a healthy cohort of French immersion students. And so I was wondering if I could get a comment on that, like the perspective of grandparenting versus program viability.
If I wasn't clear on that, Madam Chair, allow me to be clear. I said that I think we have lots of opportunities to do more grandparenting across the district, but the considerations that we would have is, first of all, the capacity at the sending school and whether or not there's room to keep everyone back, and certainly at the same time, not one or the other, looking at the viability of the receiving school. So I think both are important. While we do have more room to do more, I don't think we have the room to do everything.
Okay. I guess my concern is not just room. My concern is also program viability at the receiving school.
When I'm speaking of room, I'm also speaking of full classrooms at the receiving school.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I also had a comment about somebody, one of the other trustees, and I didn't jot down who, talked about siblings. I'm a little bit concerned about promising grandparenting for a student who might be facing those 3 schools in 3 years and saying, we'll grandparent them, and then also committing to grandparenting every one of their siblings, because that may well be 15 years of grandparenting for kids who don't even exist yet. And so I was wondering if you could comment on grandparenting siblings.
Certainly, I'll try. And we've been challenged as a district in the past about what constitutes a sibling and if they have to be walking or crawling the earth at this point in time, or just contemplated. We've had that a few times as well. I think of late, we have looked at those children who are of school-aged years and potentially a couple of years younger as sort of the reasonable cutoff. That said, I think with this whole grandparenting thing, we're going to have to come up with some criteria. Not dissimilar to the transfer process, there may be some judgment that has to be exercised about the acuity of personal circumstances, whether or not that's a sibling issue or whether it's a 3 schools in 3 years issue. We've heard different things from different people about it. As I said earlier, related to another matter, I think when it comes to siblings, we've addressed the vast majority of those concerns that were expressed that people are sort of fixating on. With the grade configuration issue, where it still remains is one program phasing out of a school and others phasing into a community school. That concern still exists, and I think that's where we'll have less flexibility with the grandparenting that may occur.
Okay. Changing lanes. Could you speak to, could somebody speak to the 26 classes resulting in, so when it was 39 classes that were projected to close, it was 42 positions we'd be able to reallocate back into the system. With 26 classes, how many positions are we projecting that we're going to be able to put back into the system?
With the classes that are now in the revised proposal, there are no educational assistants in those classrooms. And so all of the positions that we'd be looking to redistribute would be teaching positions. That being said, I think, so concretely, I think that adds up to approximately 29. I don't have it right here in front of me, but every teacher has a little bit of prep time attached to it, which is why you have that little bit of extra. So if we're talking about 26 classrooms, it's 26 teachers plus that little bit of time. I think it's important to also recognize that while right now those resources are in teaching positions, I think it would be incumbent upon us to look at what those student learning profiles require, and is that how that money that would be, distributed in terms of human resource to those positions, is that currently what the system's demanding?
Okay. Building on what Trustee Bell has talked about, I'm a little bit concerned about positions versus people. It's very easy for us to say we've allocated an EA to that school, but if we can't find anybody to fill that slot, functionally, those students are not getting the supports that they need. I have heard from numerous families about concerns about increased classroom closures, increased number of students sent home because they'd reached 10 o'clock in the morning and their child couldn't be supported by the resources that were still in the school. And I'm very concerned, I'm deeply concerned about the impact this is likely to have on both the special education students if we close these classes and the general population of students who may be further impacted by disruptions if we don't have the resources to support the students in classroom.
Through you, Madam Chair, staffing remains a concern for the organization and just about every other organization in society today, including servers in a restaurant, as an example. As Superintendent Stout mentioned, for the ones that are being considered for return in the revised plan to not disclose, there's less of an EA implication there. It's more of a teaching staff one. We'll always have some staffing pressures. The Learning Support Services carefully considered which SPCs they would put forward in the original proposal and have adjusted based on feedback in a number of areas. So we're confident that despite the overall concern for staffing, which is there, I would agree, Trustee Lyra, that's not gone away. We are using a rate of unqualified staff that we hadn't seen in previous years just because of staffing pressures. We're doing our very best to address those. The whole point of the program review at the elementary level is to reorganize what we've got in a more optimal way. So that the point of what we're bringing forward is not to create disruption for no sake at all. It is to optimize the allocation of our resources, including our human resources, in a better way through streamlined program offerings. So the idea here, again, we don't make any money here on the proposal. We don't lose any money. We're looking to redistribute to support some of the needs that are growing that you speak of.
Sorry, I didn't quite, point of order, I didn't quite catch something that was said. You said something about staff that are unqualified. There was a sentence I didn't quite catch. Could you repeat that piece?
Certainly, we go through a process to replace staff when they're absent. It begins with, it's all a collectively agreed upon process, including a cycle through who is available through a platform called Applied Education. When we get to the point and all the occasional teachers have taken positions or aren't available, we reach out to the next layer of support, which can be at times unqualified individuals who are free and willing to support. It's not ideal. It's not what we like, but it is a reality for us as an organization. So we do, and like every other district in the province, run into those from time to time. Fortunately, it's a little better this year than it has been in some other instances, but it's part of our reality.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lyra. We've put you on third-time speakers list. So now we are going down our list. We have Trustee Scott, then we have Lily Miller, then we have Anthony Wong.
Thank you. Since we're into zone-specific things, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the proposal for Richmond Public School and the southern part, as students in the southern part of the former Goulburn Township. It is really awkward having to divide a long-established village into two parts. I heard the comments about Greeley, and certainly that's another area where we're looking at a similar kind of situation. And one of the things that popped into my head was whether there had been any consideration of something different in terms of, for example, doing K-3 and 4-8 as one possibility, although I know that is not the most popular for many families, and also whether there had been any consideration given to moving the entire Middle French Immersion program out of Richmond Public to have it all at Goulburn Middle School, which would create more space for potentially for students in both the English and the immersion program, French immersion programs at RPS, which is not a large facility. So I wondered if staff could comment a little bit on their consideration of ideas like that and why they landed where they did.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We did look pretty long and hard at Richmond. And as you said, it's a challenging area just because of the facility there and the growth that has occurred in Richmond. Up till now, the growth in Richmond has not yielded many children. It's been growth that has been largely the retired community in that area. And now we're seeing the sort of development that does yield kids. And we are certainly feeling that pressure. Two things. We know that Richmond Public School itself is limited in terms of its facility. We do have a school site set aside on the west side of on Perth and McBean to the west. There is a school site in that area that we haven't gotten to yet, but it is on the books as one set aside as the development does phase through there. In the meantime, we had Goulburn Middle School in proximity. I understand it isn't in the village, but in proximity, that had been really impacted by the opening of Maplewood. And taking those children, those intermediate children to Maplewood as a 7 to 12 school. So we had an opportunity with Goulburn to look to take some of that population, and we did divide it up. I must confess that initially we did not think of K to 3, 4 to 8 configurations out there. We did hear that, as a matter of fact, from some members of the community as comments. It didn't work quite so well because of the demographics of the community itself and where the very young kids are versus the older kids. It didn't really balance nicely. And so we did look to just divide by means of a boundary and populate both schools. MFI was a consideration, although we are phasing out every MFI program in place. We did consider MFI placement, but really at the end of the day, it didn't make a difference with the overall numbers. And it didn't really give an opportunity to add more of, let's say, what is considered the village of Richmond to Richmond Public School. It didn't give that sort of opportunity given the constraints of the facility. So I hope that addresses it.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. Next on my list is Lily Miller.
Hi, thank you. As far as the IAC goes, I was happy to see some of our comments in the review document. Three things that I'd like to talk about. One is again, like other people have mentioned, the IAC has deep concern about special education support. And we've also had comments about EAs who have been brought in under Jordan's principal, who, because there was no support for the other students in the class that required support, the Jordan's principal EA, who should be supporting only the Indigenous student, was expected to support other kids in the class. So I'm just hoping that if we do see you know, a deep need for in-class support, that is addressed widely within the schools. My second point was about language. Every meeting we talk about language, Indigenous languages, and how important it is in a really for the kids to heal, for the families to heal. It's one of the many things that was taken away from the residential school and colonization. And would love to see that, a real commitment to that in the review.
And then also, we often speak about outdoor education, and we saw during COVID how it was possible to incorporate outdoor education, and for Indigenous students, Indigenous families, and non-Indigenous students, it's really important to get outside and on the land, and not just during gym class. Like, it's possible to incorporate it into especially in elementary school. So we are hoping that, among the other things that the Indigenous scholars will be bringing forward, and likely this will be part of it, but I just saw that these points were missing in the document there.
Thanks so much, Lily. Couldn't agree with you more on all fronts. In particular, just a comment on your last point around the land-based learning that we hope is one of the promising practices that we already know is something that's of value. So really appreciate your perspective, and I couldn't agree more. Hope that whatever outcome the report from our Indigenous scholar will highlight a number of those important pieces, including the comments you've raised.
All right, thank you, Director, and thank you, Lily. Going down my speakers list, Anthony Wong.
I have 3 to 5 points. Start off quickly. Earlier today, there was a 9-page document, I believe, submitted to the trustees. It's on behalf of the Special Education Advisory Committee, and it's the members of the SAYAC took the time to diligently propose input concerns for the EPR, touching on various dimensions, including inclusion and the 39 SPCs, but not limited to. I would ask that the trustees take the time to read carefully the submitted material. And then moving on. Again, through the director invited, if the SAC could, I believe, if I understood correctly, to maybe provide input earlier, and in response to the timelines, we put in a motion about the 39 SPCs, and it changed to 26. And also, if we might have other things to put in the very short timelines that are available before decisions are made. What are the timelines that to be able to put in, and the process to be able to, for us to meet and provide feedback? It is very tight because we usually meet monthly, and it would require a special meeting on our part to be able to provide feedback.
Thanks, Anthony. Before I hand it over, just to clarify one item, I believe the document you're referring to was sent to trustees yesterday, not this morning, just so we're all talking about the same document.
Thanks through you, Madam Chair. Anthony, appreciate your comment. And I know with a process like this, it's always difficult, the timing between committee meetings that are previously scheduled and any meetings that might be upcoming related to the program review. All to say, if there's an opportunity for SEAC to revise in some capacity, whether it's electronically or a meeting, I'm not sure in terms of the SEAC perspective, by all means, to resubmit that would be input that would be valued, not only from staff. I know the Board of Trustees is before you, but I'm sure the trustees would appreciate that greatly because of the revised proposal and this window of 3 weeks between the 3rd and the 24th of April for additional input, in addition to the potential for a delegation night. And I don't know if that's SEAC's intent or not. I don't make the decision on that in terms of, the individuals or groups that would be heard, but I know the Board of Trustees would be open to hearing from CX perspective in writing or otherwise. So please do. Timelines for us beyond the report next week on the 15th of April would be May 6th for a committee whole discussion related to recommendations brought forward by staff. This is just a proposal this evening. And then May 13th would be a special board on that front. And those are tentative dates. Those are what we have planned right now.
So, so the board would be open to having the SAC have a special meeting to discuss and put forward?
I think that we're going to have to take that offline with governance services and then loop back with both the board and SEAC.
And then Moving on, of the 26 SPCs remaining still considered to be phased out, what activities does the board have planned that or can undertake for more direct form of impact from the stakeholders community of the specific 26 SPCs concerning viability of supports in the EPR so that they are more duly represented? It appears that so far they don't appear to be well represented in the consultations in public sphere, if I'm not mistaken.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn over to Superintendent Stout. I do think both in our delegation evenings, we have heard from some parents, guardians, caregivers around students with special needs. I felt that in our community consultations, not only in the boardroom here, but when we were out at various schools. I happened to be at Brookfield, at Rideau, at Confederation Education Center, and in all those cases, there were members of our communities speaking to special needs. By all means, in addition to the feedback through our strategic business analysts. So I do feel there's been representation. I can't speak from a SEAC perspective on that, but most certainly we've heard in our feedback perspective shared. I'll turn it over to the superintendent in case there's anything to add, but I think we've gotten really, really valuable feedback from our special education community in both specific and general terms.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I think the only thing I would add is that at each of the consultation stages, SEAC and other committees have had the opportunity to provide very specific feedback based on those committee meetings and their purpose, the purpose of those committees. And so certainly I know that, in the most recent consultation report, there is a specific outline that speaks to what the consultation specific for SEAC was, and that is true of each committee, I believe. So I think I would agree with the director in that when it comes to having each of those community associations represented, the community association or the community representatives also sit on that committee, and then more broadly, as Director Buffoni stated, the consultation that was received from the community at large.
I agree and understand that there was a lot of feedback, but I'm concerned that particularly those three stakeholder groups in the 26 remaining SPCs, the gifted primary, language, learning disabilities, primary and junior, and learning disabilities, semi-integrated junior and intermediate, might not have spoken up in particular. And that's why I'm raising the question.
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair, I would encourage Anthony, for yourself through SEAC, to encourage them to contribute comments to engage at OCDSB. I don't feel that there was a gap there in any capacity, in terms of those groups specifically, but please encourage them to provide input to the greatest extent that they wish.
And then for the redistribution of for assessments earlier discussed, I was wondering what does that mean in particular? Is it the IPRCs being less work involved and then being more focused on IEPs? And then second question, of the 26 teachers being redistributed, will they be move towards centralized to LSS or throughout the schools, just redistributed?
And Anthony, you are at a time, so we'll answer those questions and move on with the speakers list, okay? Through you, Chair. When I was referring to how the processes that schools go through in terms of a referral process for students to be considered for specialized program classes, that was the resource that I was speaking about, not so much the IPRC and the IPRC process. The IPRC and the IEP process are legislated responsibilities of the special education team in schools, and it is one that certainly supports the students with special education needs, but is not necessarily specific to the referral process to a specialized program class. So I think it's really important to be clear that there's no change in the process for IPRC or IEP, but rather it's really leveraging the amount of time it takes for a learning support teacher to review the referral, to meet with the multidisciplinary team, to gather the resources that are needed, the documentation that is needed to support a referral,
all of that is taking time away from that learning support teacher being able to support in the classroom. So I think that was what I was referring to in that moment. I am forgetting the second part of your question. My apologies.
The 26 or 29 teachers that are being
Right.
resourced.
So thank you for that. So the intention for us right now at this time is to really be looking at how to get as many resources into classrooms as possible. That was heard loud and clear across all consultations from all interest groups, that there's a high level of concern about the amount of support available in schools. And so at this point in time, I think it's safe to say our intention would be to be looking to have any resource that we would be redistributing to have that go into classrooms.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're gonna, before I go to my third time speakers list, I am gonna pass the chair. So Trustee Jennings, can you please take the chair?
Go ahead.
All right, thank you. So I have a couple of questions that are still left unanswered about childcare. So I'm sorry, Julie, you're gonna have to move again. So my first question is, if families currently have childcare, will their spot be maintained regardless if the boundary changes or not?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. I think it's really going to depend on where their other school is and what that boundary is going to look like, because it could be a situation where the boundary sends them to a school that has a third-party partner. So it's really going to be on a case-to-case basis. I cannot provide any guarantees that their spot will be kept, because it'll really depend on where they're going. And at this point, as I mentioned earlier, we will be evaluating and seeing, based on boundary changes, what could that look like for early learning and childcare and before and after school programming, as we don't know, and my department doesn't know. It's very difficult to determine who and how many and what that's going to look like, depending on who and how many need care and whether they have siblings or not. So at this point, I can't provide you with any information on that, but there is no provision that they get priority at that school, because it's really going to depend on whether it's an OCDSB or not. If it is an OCDSB school that they would be going to, yes, they would get priority.
Okay, and then can I assume that's the same type of answer if families are currently on the wait list and then they're going to be moving to a new school? It will depend if their new school has childcare available or something like that, if their spot will be maintained.
Correct, because it'll depend if it's an OCDSB school, a third-party operator, or whether a school does not currently have before and after school care. And I could tell you at this point, there is only 6 schools in the district that does not offer before and after school care.
All right, that would be my questions for childcare. So I have 2 other questions. So we've talked a lot about the changes and the impact of these changes through the elementary program review. But obviously, if this is to pass and we implement it, that will not be the end, and we will be monitoring the changes. And I'm wondering what indicators we're going to use to track any challenges or success, and how we'll be sharing this with the community.
Through you, Madam Chair, great question, Vice Chair Milburn. I think to begin, for the upcoming school year, staff will look to bring a quarterly report to each semester, so to speak, on progress for the transition as a matter of information for the Board of Trustees based on a significant decision as an organization. So we'll look to do that over the course of the upcoming school year, potentially even at the end of the school year, somewhere around June, the progress of the plan stepping forward into next school year, but quarterly an update. Beyond that, we do this work every year, looking at our properties, how the load is in terms of enrollment. So there's no question each and every school year, this will be an ongoing review to monitor and track progress related to our strategic plan. I mean, the work we're doing here is to optimize our resources to get to the heart of what we've got in our strategic plan around learning, well-being, and social responsibility. So that will be key. We'll also see, quite frankly, we're excited about the proposal we have before the Board of Trustees. We think this opens up to a greater and greater extent equity of access to programs and services more than ever before. We've still got work to do, there's no question. It's not perfect, but it's a huge step in the right direction. We look forward to welcoming students to the district under that capacity in 2 very dynamic programs, dual tracked in the majority of our schools. We'll monitor everything from enrollment to our properties over time and bring that to the Board of Trustees, likely in regular reports that come forward, including capital, for instance, on any renovations we have to do, but also, as I said, some specific reports related to the program review if and as required.
Okay, thank you. I think it will be very important to track in. I understand it's part of our regular business, but I think with any change, it'll be very important to remain transparent with any of the indicators that we're using to track success or where we might need to make improvements. My last question is there going to be regular opportunities for the community or parents or guardians to voice their concerns or provide feedback as the proposed changes are implemented?
So through you, Madam Chair, it is really important for us as an organization to return to stability. Engaging in a process like this, we knew at the outset would create instability. You are ruffling feathers here on almost every front: program offerings, school boundaries, grade configurations, you name it. Once a decision is made, the goal of the organization will be to return to stability with clarity so that everyone understands where they end up in this process. From there forward, we will be looking to returning to a normal function because our focus needs to be on learning and on wellness. And for that reason, we will be asking our schools to take the lead. We've got incredible administrators as a system leader group to take the lead at their sites. They know their sites well, their staff know their sites, to be able to nurture a process through to its completion. And we understand with the phasing out, that's going to be a multi-year process. We'll look to do that for the benefit of the organization because stability will be required. And so that will be the plan moving forward. It won't be a reopening of this discussion every semester to engage the community in some large-scale process because this process is large-scale and complicated enough. So once decisions are made, really honestly, from me on down, we got to get back to work of learning and well-being for our organization. So it will be at the site-based level once those decisions have been put in place.
That's it. Chair, back to you then.
All right, thank you. So we're going to go to third time speakers list, and also just a reminder to everyone in the room and also to our community that we are going to be talking about this again next week. So this is not the last opportunity for us to have this discussion. With that said, let's dive into third time speakers. So I have Trustee Kaplan-Murth, then Trustee Bell, then Trustee Lyra.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. On March 22nd in the morning, I met with Director Buffon and Manager Osterchuk in the presence of Chair Scott and Vice Chair Milburn. We talked about what was happening and the proposed changes to the boundaries and grade configurations. When I walked into that meeting, I said to Director Buffon, I absolutely support this elementary program review. As soon as I sat down and I heard that the plan was not to add French immersion to those schools, I said, I cannot support that. Trustees know that I've submitted a motion. I've given notice of motion, which will be presented at our meeting on April 15th, to state that the director and staff would be directed to finding a way to make French immersion available at Arch Street and at Hawthorne. When we talked about it on that day, Chair Scott asked, well, what about if we went back to the original proposal? And I said that would actually have been better than what you're proposing, which is to renege on addressing the actual disparities in our district. You did not listen to the voice of the trustee who has met with the principals, the vice principals, the staff, the parents, and the community around this issue. So I'm hoping that next meeting we'll be able to have a fulsome discussion about why we're letting down our most disadvantaged students. And those are our racialized populations. Those are our populations that are lower socioeconomic status who do not have the wherewithal to advocate the way others advocated. One of the issues that I've heard tonight is that there are only so many pupils to be spread around, but we are letting down the students at a school that is currently 44% capacity and another school that's currently 57% capacity. We're letting down those students while we're finding a way miraculously to help students. For example, we've allowed for years Lady Evelyn to be at 31% capacity. We've allowed much more in the Glebe, where we would never dream of saying we should close down that school because there'd be such pushback. We've allowed it to be projected to go down to 39%. What we need to do, and I've heard from parents who've said that if French immersion were offered at Arch Street, they would have sent their children to Arch Street very clearly, very explicitly. But instead, we shuttle them off to Vincent Massey, which is at 109% in the projection. Pleasant Park is 129% and has portables. You can find the students in Alta Vista to allow those students to go to French immersion at Arch and at Hawthorne. If you need to, it can be phased in the same as we're phasing in French immersion in other schools. I have more to say about Lady Evelyn, so I'll need to be put back on the list.
All right, thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. I am going to look to Chair Scott, and then if staff would like to comment, if Chair Scott would like to add anything about the discussion.
I don't think that there's anything very much that I can add. We had a proposal. We had some proposed revisions to it. And I mean, it is what it is. The bottom line is there are limited numbers of ways to do things given the amount of school space that is there in the Alta Vista community and the numbers of students who are registered in the various programs. But I mean, so far we've come up with a couple of ways to do it, but only one of them had French immersion in all of the schools. And that was deemed to be undesirable because of the K-3, 4 to 8 setup, which had some significant disadvantages as well. So I guess the question ultimately is which disadvantages do we have to accept? Is there a way to avoid all of the disadvantages or not?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'd only add to Chair Scott's comments, and I agree it is what it is. We did meet with the trustee, as we did with every trustee, on the proposed changes and where we could land. You know, the creation of just starting a program in a given area at a given school requires it to have a boundary. And when you do that, it's not just as simple as, oh, just get something going in an area and see it grow over time. It will pull students from other schools. And that is part of the tension that we were managing and the feedback we received, that allowing each site across the district, as wonderful, and I don't disagree with the trustees' comments here, as aspirational as that is, and then we repeat at the outset, we knew we'd have some exceptions to that overall plan, was going to be pulling at the boundaries of other schools to an extent that was going to create other hardships for our consideration. I don't know that there's more to add to that than that, other than, again, staff feels on balance with all of the factors to take into consideration, what we've put before the Board of Trustees as a revised proposal is sound and sensible. It's not perfect. We'll continue to work on it over time, but I don't think there's any dispute around the table that perfection wasn't going to be achieved to begin with. There were going to be some trade-offs for us to work our way through, and that's what we've done.
Oh,
Okay, thank you. I bet you put me on the list.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
all right, we have Trustee Bell and then Trustee Lara.
Thank you. Quickly through you, Chair. I really appreciated how our Vice Chair Milburn brought forth the issue of results-based management. I think for a change of this scale, having some sort of logic model that outlines what decisions, what outcomes we've decided on, and how they will actually feed up into the results and the ultimate outcome that we are looking for is prudent. We do this in the federal public service. We do this in the municipal public service. We do this at all levels when we're proposing changes of this magnitude. And so I would be very grateful to know if, in fact, there are plans to undertake a results-based management framework for the entire proposal. Thanks.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think Trustee Bell speaks to a very important element of our work. Part of what I've seen, and I've only had 2 goes at it this year with our reports annually, we've got infrastructure in place, and that should be our measure. Learning, well-being, and social responsibility. None of them are perfect, none of them are absolute, but all areas of a work in progress. Again, I've only sat a couple of times at the table here and some of the frustration around the lack of progress in some of our areas, and in some of our areas of growing concern, including well-being. The point of the program review is to take the resources we have and redistribute them more optimally to address the growing challenges and concerns and needs that we have. So I would agree wholeheartedly with Trustee Bell. I think our measures of achievement need to be kept in the metric of monitoring progress over time when we streamline programs. Our wellness and our school climate surveys in the reorganization of our infrastructure to meet the needs of our students. And then, of course, our work around social responsibility in our communities, having our students become engaged, contributing citizens to society need to be our measures. So I don't dispute whatsoever the metrics. I think they're there and in place. These changes that we're bringing forward look to improve all of those aspects of our organization. It won't happen overnight in one fell swoop, but it does bring us back to improving learning, improving well-being, and improving social responsibility.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just a final comment to reiterate my gratitude on this revised proposal. I think there's a lot of really great material that will ultimately have a benefit for our students. And so I want to say thank you to all the work that has been done behind the scenes, and to our incredibly capable and professional staff for what they've produced.
All right, thank you, Trustee Bell. Trustee Lara?
Thanks. I have a couple of quick questions that didn't really fit into any of my other categories, and then I'll go to my zone. My first question is that I heard from Mr. Wong that there's a desire by SEAC to go back and re-edit their motion or have that conversation again. There is a SEAC meeting on May 7th, which is before our final decision on May 13th. Is that enough time to take a recommendation from SEAC and make sure that it makes it to the board?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's very hard to comment on because I'm not sure what a revised recommendation might be. And so my hope would be to include that either through the platform or directly to send that to us. The sooner the better, especially if it's significant. I don't know what to say because I don't know what the recommendation could be.
The regulation requires SEAC to have 10 meetings a year. Is there any possibility of moving perhaps the June or the May meeting earlier in the year to allow them to have that extra meeting?
Trustee Lyra, we're going to take the chair, and I will be taking that up with the director and with governance services, and then we can provide an answer back to the entire board and to SEAC as well. Tonight, I don't think it's going to be feasible to answer that question.
Okay. All right. There was a number that's floated around about how there's 1,500 more students moving this year than than a regular year. But my simple addition of the numbers in Appendix A lead me to a number much greater than 1,500. I'm wondering if you could explain how that came to be, or which math you're using to get these numbers.
There's a bit of context that goes with that. Every year, we have about 6,000 to 8,000 students who transition in normal points. And the numbers that you see, that delta at the end, also captures those kids going from school to school. What we tried to do was look at how many students we'd have just reaching natural transition points this year and figure out that delta. We think it's about 1,500, probably a little less. So last time through with the first iteration of this, it was about 3,000 students. So with the changes that we've proposed to the model and the boundaries, grade structures, what have you, I think we've more than halved that.
Great.
Okay.
I want to talk for a minute about the special education phase out. I think the special education program phase out is over too long a period of time. I appreciate the proposal that has come forward right now says that we close enrollment in JK in 2026. The official age of schooling is grade 1. Has any consideration been given to closing the enrollment for only people who are in the alternative program now so that we have a shorter phase out across the next number of years?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's a topic that staff has discussed somewhat. We're trying to accommodate to the best of our ability the offering an opportunity. It's something staff can take under advisement for any final recommendation.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is there is a possibility that the final year of enrollment could have been this year, so starting grade 1 next year, and that any student who was not in grade 1, that is an option that the board has.
Through you, Madam Chair, it's multifaceted like every other decision, including a number of guidelines that we must follow as a district. Again, staff will take the comment back and have a look and give it consideration.
Okay, I'll ask that one again next week. So back to my zone, which I haven't had a chance to talk about yet. I'm really glad that you had a chance to look at the, we had a conversation a number of weeks back about a K-3 option at Robert E. Wilson, and you said that there was too many students to be able to make that work. Was that boundary with a straight line down MacArthur, or was that with the sawtooth on MacArthur that currently exists?
I believe that one was taken in with both sides of MacArthur, and the sawtooth is simply the backs of the properties that front on MacArthur.
Okay. I have heard a strong desire from my community to move the 7-8 proposed program from York Street to RPPS. I've had a number of conversations with various stakeholders on that, and that is something that I would be willing to support. I know I'm not going to put you on the spot and be like, what do you think right now? But it's something I'd like to see considered for the final review. Those were some of the two major issues that I was hoping to raise. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lyra. We're on for time speakers, so Trustee Kaplan-Murphy.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Respectfully, it is what it is not an answer when we're leaving behind our most disadvantaged students. So I guess the question will be whether or not we are going to do anything about that. And I'm going to just turn now to Lady Evelyn, because we have heard from many families that they would like, I know that the answer from the manager about adding more French immersion all at once is that it's not possible. We can't have 3 tracks at once. It violates PAR because it would take too many students from Elgin Street, etc. But the question has been raised again and again, why aren't we at least adding French immersion grade 1 starting in 2026? Since already kindergarten is all 50-50, it doesn't make any sense for it to be kindergarten in 2026. If grade 1 at Lady Evelyn in French immersion were offered, then people's families wouldn't have to send their child off to Elgin Street or to Hopewell for grade 1 French immersion, which is what they're now faced with. It really is illogical for them to have to choose to either put their children in one school and then flip them back the following year, or to just allow them to begin straight away at Lady Evelyn. There are even people whose children in kindergarten would have to start JK at Hopewell and then switch an SK to Lady Evelyn, and that just doesn't make any sense. Why aren't we just allowing them to start kindergarten? Should be 50-50 anywhere, so they should just be able to go to Lady Evelyn, and then in 2026 they should be able to start grade 1 French immersion at Lady Evelyn. Surely that would not put too much of a burden, nor would it violate PAR by taking too many students from Elgin or from Hopewell. So I'm putting that out there on behalf of the community. They have asked repeatedly to make Lady Evelyn a community school, which is what we're intending to do, and we're proposing to do it too slowly. So other than that, the concerns really that have been raised from my constituents are concerns that we've already all discussed in terms of grandfathering and in terms of childcare. And I don't think that we need to go any further with that. So please consider fixing the situation in Alta Vista. And please consider addressing the situation at Lady Evelyn. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Meier. I can see that the director and manager are nodding their heads, and they will take that away. We have come to the end of our speakers list for this report. So thank you again, staff, for another long evening and for bringing this forward. It is greatly appreciated. We are now going to move on to information items, and I'm going to call upon Trustees Scott and Jenikins to provide an OPSPA report.
Thank you, Chair. Last Saturday's trustees met for the Eastern Regional OPSPA Board of Director meeting, where we were hosted by Upper Canada. And I just wanted to share a presentation by Executive Superintendent Eric Harding, where he showcased a real world learning program, and where, real world and the school world were, intermixed. He highlighted a number of programs that connected students' work to the community. And just a couple examples: the Storybox Project, the South Crosby Superheroes Project, and Decodable Books. And it really seemed to be very successful programs within the school where students were really engaged and motivated to learn. So perhaps, we could certainly highlight in our district programs such as that.
All right, thank you, Trustee Jenikins. Chair Scott, anything else to add?
I think Trustee Jenikins has covered it. Thank you.
All right, are there any questions for our OPSPA reps? Seeing none, I will look to Trustee Lyra in absence of Trustee Lee to provide an OSTA update.
There is no public OSTA update at this time.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lyra. Are there any questions for our OSTA rep? Seeing none, I will move on to new business. Is there any items of new business? Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for whatever staff person the director feels appropriate to answer this. So my question is, does the board have a policy regarding the wearing of keffiyehs?
Through you, Madam Chair, not specifically.
And a follow-up, Madam Chair, does the board have a policy, or has the board made a statement that wearing a keffiyeh is an act of aggression?
Through you, Madam Chair, not that I'm aware of in any official capacity of a statement of any sort.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Trustee Blackburn. Are there any other items of new business? Trustee Kaplan-Meier.
Yes, so actually, I just wanted to respond that, in fact, there was already there is actually a statement officially on record in terms of keffiyehs and how it affects Jews in the community that came up before with a trustee, and it was dealt with by previous General Counsel Richard Sinclair. So I ask you to please look to that.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll find any commentary on that. Thanks, Trustee Kaplan.
Okay, and we can take that away. Minash, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Briefly, yes, I would like to know where that statement is. And because if there is a statement, it sounds like it is anti-Palestinian racism, and that the keffiyeh is a symbol of.
I'm sorry, point of order, but this is treading dangerously on harming a group of people.
I am in the process of chairing. I will allow, I have not heard anything yet. Minash, and I apologize if I am mispronouncing your name. We're going to take it away. We have asked the questions about a keffiyeh, and if there is any policy, we will report back to the community at this time.
Sorry, how do we get that? information. This is my first community.
We are going to look into it and we're going to circulate in a memo to community members and to trustees once we confirm the information.
And the advisory committees?
Yeah, yes, that's what I mean by committee members.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Kaplan-Meier.
I just also remind you that we do actually have a policy that we all agreed upon as trustees that said that there would be no discrimination against anybody based on their nationality, their citizenship, their religion, their culture, the color of their skin. And we all agreed on that. And that was included in this.
All right, thank you for the reminder, Trustee Kaplan-Meier. Is there any other items of new business? Anthony Wong, please go ahead.
Through you, the chair. At the special board meeting, there was I believe two parents who raised a concern about parenting with special needs children with EAs, about 50-50 being able to only have resourcing 50-50 and being sent home for the other 50% of the time. It got raised again also at the SAYAC at the last meeting, that the same concern. So the question being if this is a very frequent issue parents face and what's causing it and the issues surrounding this.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Anthony, for the query. I'll take that back, look into it from a perspective of staff on any sort of soft versions of exclusions of any sort. I know that it's a concern that's been raised around the province. We'll look at that and provide information again back in memorandum to trustees. Something we'll follow up on that.
All right. I am seeing no other items of new business, so I now declare this meeting adjourned. Have a great evening, everyone.